Test, test. Let me find out with the screen.
I think you should move it up a bit. Here. I think you lean it back. And for some reason, there's wheels on the back and not the front. Yeah.
All right, that's good.
And you're going to do the switching over
Yep.
there like you did.
But how do I, oh, there.
Test, test. See? Test, test, test.
Well, there's the library.
Okay.
It's the CPF.
Okay,
Test, test, test.
okay, yeah, that's good.
This is how much they pay the street.
So we're gonna get started in just a moment, please. If everybody could please take their seats. All right. Superintendent. Good evening, everybody. As per policy 1204, bylaws of the board, the regular meeting of the Board of Education will be recorded and may be streamed live, archived, and accessed online. The board also reserves the right to edit by motion of the board at any meeting. Choose not to stream live or archive a meeting or a portion thereof. I'm going to start off with some introductions tonight. I will start off by introducing our trustees. To my far right, we have Trustee Ward, Trustee Perot, Vice Chair Coburn. Trustee Ross and Trustee Wilson send their regrets this evening. We also have Trustee Todd. We have the Superintendent of Schools, Gord Stewart. And we have the Secretary Treasurer, Brian Isley. And myself, Board Chair, Megan Dykeman. And at the back, we have our Executive Assistant, Lori Mason. And we have Assistant Superintendent, Barry Bunyan. Assistant Superintendent, Mal Gill. Assistant Superintendent, Woody Bradford. Assistant Secretary Treasurer, Shin Chand. We also have Joanne Abshire, our Communications Manager, and Dale Vo, our IT Tech. And from our partner groups this evening, we have from QP 1260, Charlotte Major. From the LTA, Wendy Cook and Tanya Kerr. And we have from our Langley Principals and Vice Principals Association, we have John Pusak. Welcome. And I appreciate everybody being here tonight on this beautiful day. And we are going to call the meeting to order at 7:03. And I would like to acknowledge that the Langley School District is located on the traditional lands of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Themiamu First Nations. And before we get started this evening, we unfortunately didn't have a meeting this month ahead of the National Day of Mourning. And I just wanted to share with everybody here tonight that in the May the 1st, 2018 regular meeting, the board had passed a motion to encourage all secondary schools to observe 1 minute of silence at 11 a.m. on or before April 28th on an annual basis to acknowledge the Day of Mourning. And the Langley Board of Education would also like to say that there are 131 work-related deaths and many more injuries in BC in 2018, and for most of us working as a fact of life. So safe working conditions should be 2. So no injury or death at work is acceptable. And while we have made some progress in the workplace, safety in BC needs more work. There's much more to be done. So we just wanted to start off with that statement, and we are going to be able to have somebody present to us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing you present. So the first item on our agenda is over to you, Vice Chair Coburn, is our report from in camera. Thank you. And next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. Could I please get a mover that the Board of Education adopts the consent agenda items as provided? Moved by Trustee Todd, seconded by Trustee Perot. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the consent agenda is presented. Our next item is consideration of the main agenda. Could I please get a mover that the agenda be approved? Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Perot. Any additions, changes of order, or such of the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as presented, approved. And the next item is a report from the foundation. I will turn it over to the superintendent to introduce our presentation tonight.
Oh, there you go. Your mic's on now.
Okay. Thank you, Gord, and thank you for inviting me to come this evening to talk about the foundation. We are very pleased with our progress over, it's now been 15 years since the foundation started. So I'm going to tell you what we've been doing in the last, probably just the last year. I won't go into 15 years. So we were incorporated with a mission to make learning unforgettable for every Langley student. Our mandate is to provide and support programs and initiatives that are not funded or fully funded by the Ministry of Education. And our goal is to ensure that every Langley student receives the maximum benefit of the education to which they are entitled. The foundation has about $3.7 million in investments in cash. We raised more than $1.5 million last year and dispersed $900,000 to support students, schools, and programs. The foundation is a federally registered charity independent from the school district with its own board of directors. Currently, there are 10 directors serving on the board from the community and from the areas of education and business. One of the areas that we really have concentrated on for the last 5 years or so is our Food for Thought campaign. In 2014, I started hearing stories about kids coming to school hungry, and that was kind of astonishing to me in Langley. So we did a survey, and we actually found that there were 3,000 kids coming to school hungry every single day. And Langley, being what it is, a community that really wants to help, and when they hear that their neighborhoods and their children are in stress, they really come forward and rally. And because of that, individuals, businesses, corporations, associations, we are able to have breakfast programs in 25 schools now, with more coming on stream every year. We have snack programs in 13 schools, backpack programs where kids receive backpacks filled with food to take home every Friday and on holidays to their hungry families. And we're starting to get more and more lunch programs in the schools as well. Right now we have 4, but we want to expand that for sure. And it's more come on stream every year. The demographics in Langley are changing. There's, when you look around, it looks like it's fairly affluent in all the neighborhoods, but there's lots of people living in basement suites and on trailers on properties, and there's lots of people struggling in Langley that maybe are a bit invisible. Tied to our Food for Thought campaign is garden towers, and I just love these things. They're miraculous growing machines. They need very little water. There's no soil, no insecticides, no great acres of land. They grow in any temperature, all year round, any climate, and they produce huge crops of lettuce and kale and cucumber, tomatoes, herbs, zucchini, strawberries, all year round. And the kids that may look at them, they get to grow them themselves, pick them off this whatever it is, a tower, and eat them. And they just love it. And it's not only supplements the meal programs, but it also is a great teaching tool for kids that learn where their actual produce is coming from and how good it actually is. The foundation is supporting physical literacy in the school district. It all started with a grant that we received, and it was designed to implement and sustain a culture of physical literacy throughout the school district. And it's movement not only in the gym or in PE class, but throughout the curriculum and in all subjects and all the time. So kids are moving, when they go to the washroom or they stand up to go and sharpen their pencil. They're just constantly moving, and there's all these implements that we put in the classrooms so that it facilitates a movement, and it's been shown that it enhances learning and really rejuvenates the will to learn throughout the day. Tied to this is our mood walks, and these are great. It's a great initiative that continues at LSS with the Focus program, and it's a lot of the kids in the Focus program are a bit depressed or have anxiety. They might have had some trauma in their childhood. And when they come on these mood walks, and these are kids that, don't necessarily want to get out and enjoy nature or interact with each other. They're quite isolated in a lot of cases. But they get out on these mood walks, and as you can see, they're enjoying themselves. And they go once a week, and they go to all different places, and they really start to interact with nature, and the anxiety kind of drops away, and they feel good about themselves. It really works, so the foundation is supporting that for sure. PA-MOJA and the butterfly effect. This is I love this program. It's we started facilitating their fundraising about 4 years ago, and just this past year, PA-MOJA has come under the umbrella of the foundation. It's a society that promotes global education among Kenyan students and Canadian students, and also tries to help Kenyan students who, in turn, help our Canadian students understand each other. And we have Canadian students going to Kenya, and then what doesn't happen in a lot of cases are Kenyans coming to Canada. Last year we had 5 Kenyan girls here telling their stories and interacting with all the teachers and superintendents and administrators and students, and they were like superstars. Everybody loved them. They're funny and they're interesting, and they just fit in so perfectly in our Canadian culture. And they created friendships that are going to carry on, I think, throughout their lives. They continue to talk to each other on Skype and through email, Facebook. It was great to see. Also in Kenya, when secondary school is not free, it costs about $1,000 a year for a student to go to school from grade 9 to grade 12. So that's $4,000 for a Kenyan student to graduate. And about 70% of the population cannot afford that. And of that 70%, most of them are girls, because if a family can afford to send one of their children to school, it's going to be the boy rather than the girl. So that means that the girl oftentimes has to get married when she's about 13 to a much older man. Her future is pretty dismal. And the boys, theirs isn't much better, because if they don't have an education, then there's very little opportunities in Kenya for uneducated people. But just getting your grade 12 education is a huge step up. People respect somebody with a grade 12 education. And it's, on one side, it's a life of brutality, a loss of freedom, poverty, and on the other side, it's respect, prosperity, and hope. So a mere $4,000 determines the destiny of hundreds of intelligent and dedicated young Kenyans that really should have an education. They are entitled to it as a citizen of this globe. The foundation also supports summer school programs, especially for kids transitioning from middle to secondary school. This is a kind of a vulnerable age for a lot of students. They can go either way, and if they don't have family support, it can be a difficult time for them. It's pretty daunting to go from a middle school right into a high school, and without some support, some sense of confidence, and some friendships. So the summer school provides those, not only an academic program, but an opportunity for them to kind of go out of their comfort zone and go rafting and canoeing and visit areas where they wouldn't normally be able to go. A lot of kids in these situations have never even been to Stanley Park or Vancouver Island. So we offer these programs at Vanguard Secondary, or we support them, Vanguard Secondary, Walnut Grove Secondary, and HD Stafford. Ever since the foundation started in 2005, we've always supported literacy. Every year, we write a grant, and we usually receive 3,000 brand new hard-covered books. They come in these great big containers, and they're dropped off down at maintenance. And it's just like Christmas. We go down and see all these books and then distribute them to the schools. And every student, we figure out what students don't have books at home, or they don't have a culture of reading or literacy, and choose them surreptitiously. We pretend that they won the lottery. So they come in and they are able to choose their 10 most favorite books. They're all laid out in the library on the tables, and they come barreling in and choose their books. They're so excited, and they put them in their bags, and they start talking to each other and saying, "What book do you have?" And "I can't wait to read this one." They take them home over the summer, and the literacy teachers have determined that by doing this, the summer slide is much less. Their literacy skills have improved, and we've been doing it now for 3 years, and we continue to do it, and the statistics and the evaluations and assessments are amazing, are brilliant. So hopefully we'll be able to do this forever. I love getting all those books. They're really fun to receive. So the foundation supports, this is a district initiative, the I.D.E.A Summit and the I.D.E.A but the foundation is supporting it in raising money to provide scholarships to the kids that participate in the I.D.E.A Summit. Is the second annual. It's on May 8th at the Langley Events Center. I think there's going to be 6,000 kids at there watching the kids with their entrepreneurial booths, showing what they can do with their marketing plans and things that they've developed. And this is from kids from K to 12. So last year it was pretty amazing, and I think it's going to be even better this year. And for the first time, they're going to do the I.D.E.A, which is a pretty amazing initiative, I think. It's introducing, it's to incentivize students to form teams to solve world problems. And this year it's going to be what to do about single-use plastic. So they have to come up with a feasible solution to this problem. It can't be pie in the sky. It has to be something that could actually work, and they have to present it, and it's going to be in front of a panel of fairly sophisticated judges. And if they follow all the matrix and they do exactly what they're supposed to do and can actually present something that might work, they could win $20,000 to go on to their secondary school. It's a scholarship. And it's divided among the team, and I think there's about 3 or 4 to a team. And the second prize is $7,000, so I can't wait to see these these pitches. They pitch in front of the judges. So if you have the opportunity, you should really go and see it. The foundation supports arts. We team up with the West Fine Arts Show to put on a fundraiser to support foundation initiatives. We also have the student art projects on display interspersed with the works of 22 renowned artists from Western Canada. They are professional artists and their works are brilliant. And we also do the film festival. We had our 4th annual. We featured 6 screenings, and we had the student montage. There were 22 films. The students did all Friday afternoon from Brookswood, Langley Fine Arts, Langley Secondary, and R.E. Mountain. And yeah, they were brilliant. The techniques and the cinematography and the stories and the editing, I mean, they're going to have their name marquee, I'm positive. And then we had an opening night reception. We showed Indian Horse, which was a really gripping, moving story about a boy at residential school. The director was in attendance. On Saturday, we showed And When the Storm Fades, Black Klansman, I recommend that, and Bohemian Rhapsody, and interspersed were 6 documentaries. So it was a really fun weekend of watching films, some of the best I've seen. Other arts programs, we have partnerships where we've been able to donate to Langley Fine Arts and a $5,000 grant every year to support music programs and arts programs. This year, the foundation is supporting the LSS 110th anniversary celebration. It's on June 8th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Langley High School was actually started in 1909, so it's one of the oldest high schools in probably on the planet. And so we're doing the and then we have a VIP receptions where people can go to the Sandman Signature Hotel afterwards and interact with their friends with some nice glass of wine and some hors d'oeuvres. And we want to start a legacy fund to provide scholarships for Langley students in perpetuity. A lot of kids at Langley Secondary don't have the opportunity to go on to secondary school, even though they are certainly capable of it. So we want to try and raise $1,000 per decade, which would be $110,000 to provide scholarships each year. Speaking of scholarships, the foundation administers all the scholarships for the Langley School District. We have about $1.6 million endowment invested with Vancouver Foundation, whereupon we receive $40,000 per year, and then we receive an additional $300,000 on an ongoing basis. And there's 398 scholarships that we give out every year. Of course, we have our 2 signature events. The 14th Annual Grand Prix Gala is coming up on May 26th. It's at Thunderbird Show Park during an equestrian jumping competition. You see the world-class horse equestrian jumping, gourmet hors d'oeuvres. You have wine and craft beer tasting, silent auction, and a chance to win an incredible getaway. And we usually raise about $60,000 gross. And then we have our 14th annual golf tournament. It's coming up on August 26th at Redwoods Golf Course. This is a great event. It's really fun. It lasts all day long. Starts off with a tailgate party, golf, snacks, barbecued steak and salmon dinner, silent auction, lots of prizes, lots of contests. It's a great day. So, and then the foundation, we have a website, langleySchoolDistrictFoundation.com. Facebook, so like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. It's always wonderful to hear about the initiatives that your foundation spearheads within our district and all of the incredible opportunities that are afforded to our students from the work that you and your board do. I do have at least one speaker who would like to say something, and I just want to say that, was that a corn cannon that the superintendent?
I don't know what he was doing with that.
Very lengthy. All right, so over to Vice Chair Coburn.
that? Am I on? Thank you very much. So just two things, one question but one comment. If I understand you correctly, when you get your books, the children that receive the books, you make them believe that somehow their name was selected from a random draw and that's how they got their book. That's beautiful. That's really, there's so much around your parents' socioeconomic status that has nothing to do with you, and so to do it in a way where they don't feel marked out for getting a book is pretty clever and thoughtful. But I would like to know, from where you're positioned in your experience and all your perspective, what do you think is the greatest need facing the students in our district?
I still think it is the having healthy breakfasts and lunches and snacks throughout the day. There's just no way that you can learn on an empty stomach. If you come to school hungry, you can't concentrate. There's behavioral problems. You're kind of cold and angry. And after they have a nice breakfast, first thing in the morning, sitting around with their friends, the difference is amazing. And they start the day off happy and satisfied and ready to go.
Right, a whole trickle-down effect for everyone in the building.
Exactly, yeah, and the teachers and the principals have noticed it, the difference in the behavior and the attendance and the enthusiasm of and their ability to learn.
Thank you. Trustee Ward.
But I didn't have to press it, so thank you. With respect to, and I'm going to ask a few that is meant for a broad online audience, because I know the answers to them, but how does one qualify for the breakfast program in particular? Are they just a student there, or and they can just show up and participate, or do you have to qualify?
Usually, the principal will ask us if we can support their program at the school. We started off supporting schools that we thought were sort of inner city schools, and but they're needed everywhere now. Walnut Grove, we have them. D.W. Poppy, we're starting one up at the new school, Peter Ewart. They're just needed everywhere. So the principal will ask if we can support the program. It's usually, we ask how many students does he think will be there, and we hope that the support is from the community as well, so that we get some help from maybe the parents and some of the businesses around the area, and it becomes a real community effort. And the foundation supports it financially, but not totally. And then we order the food, and we have an agreement with Save on Foods, where we can order the food from them online. They give us a 15% discount and deliver the food to the school for free. So that helps a lot.
But for individual students to qualify, they just have to show up, right? Is that the way it is? Okay.
Yeah, there's no stigma.
Perfect.
We didn't want it to be only for kids that couldn't afford to have breakfast. Didn't want any of that to happen. Anybody can go to the breakfast program. In fact, we encourage it so that we know that the hungry students are getting fed, but so are the some of the students that don't necessarily need it, but they may have just run out of time and didn't get breakfast on their way out the door.
So just, I think that's fantastic. It's just a statement of my son's talk about it before.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. With respect to the scholarship, $110,000, is that meant to carry forward a small annual scholarship based on the interest, or is it $110,000 you're looking to do the same thing the following year?
Oh, it's $110,000 for an endowment, so that we would use the interest from this. Yeah.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative and wonderful to, as always, receive an update on these great initiatives. So we do thank you for coming out this evening. We look forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
All right, so trustees, we're now on to delegations. And just before we go to our delegation tonight, I'd just like to remind everybody that delegations are an opportunity to speak and present information to the board. consideration. This time, there was not an opportunity with the board or committee. However, trustees can ask clarifying questions. And tonight we do have Brian Martins from the new Westminster District Labour Council, and he is going to be providing a delegation to the board on the day of mourning for workers killed and injured. Welcome, Ryan, and thank you for coming out to our district tonight. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, board members, staff, partners, guests in the audience. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. My name again is Brian Martins. For some of you that do know me, I am on the executive of the district PAC as well too, as a member at large there. But tonight I come to you as a delegate from the new Westminster District Labour Council. I also come to you as a proud union member for my union Move Up, the Movement to United Professionals, and a worker in the workplace, as well as a father of a future worker. And so I come to you with regards to this. One of the things I'm hoping it's supposed to do is supposed to be just rotate through the slides. And so by all means, if you just want to watch the slides while I do a little bit of speaking and talking to you about this, that would be great. If it doesn't present, I'll just try to keep on through. But so each year, the new Westminster District Labour Council presents to city councils, school boards within our region to seek your support and recognition of the April 28th as a day of mourning for workers killed and injured on the job. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your acknowledgement when you started as well too, that you've already started and made that commitment with regarding to the minute of silence. One of the great things that I did see in our newsletter at our local school was the fact that flags were at half-mast as well too. And so I do thank you for the initiations already going on. So that is great to see and great to hear that this is going on, but we do need to do more. We believe workplace health and safety is everyone's responsibility. The purpose of the day of mourning is really twofold: to remember workers killed and injured on the job and to rededicate ourselves to preventing future injuries through education. The impacts of workplace death and injury are felt by our families, our friends, and our communities. But when we all work together, we can ensure every worker goes home safe at the end of the day. Education is key to prevention, and unions are leading the way. The British Columbia Federation of Labour's Health and Safety Centre is a center of excellence for occupational health and safety, training and education. Very proud to say that I'm also one of the guest presenters and facilitators for them as well too. So I have a little bit of a bias there too, just full disclosure. The center's programming is open to everyone, regardless of the current work status, including students and employers. The center has helped thousands of workers, organizations, and companies across British Columbia know their rights and their responsibilities for workplace safety. This is essentially critical for young and new immigrant workers who may not know all their rights, including the right to refuse dangerous work. Young worker committees in many of our unions are on the forefront of education and raising awareness about workplace health and safety. Through the Federation's Alive After 5 program, trained young workers speak to students in British Columbia schools about health and safety and their rights as workers. Every year, the British Columbia Federation of Labour Young Worker Committee organizes a sit-in at the anniversary of the 2005 death of Grant Despatie, a young worker who lost his life in a gas and dash in Maple Ridge. This tragedy resulted in strong regulations being enacted around working alone and at night. Unfortunately, though, those laws have since been weakened at the request of employers, and the sit-in reminds people just how valuable young workers are and the true cost of not protecting them. We also work with partners in our community on workplace health and safety. The BC Labour Heritage Centre Society partners with unions and WorkSafe BC on their Day of Mourning BC Schools project. They provide resources to schools for the Day of Mourning with the specific goal of reducing the number of deaths and injuries among young workers through education. This is critical as young workers are the most vulnerable and statistically the most likely to be injured at work. Union members also advocate for legislation and regulations that are strong enough to protect all workers in British Columbia. In addition to making submissions on the Employment Standards Act's consultations this year, just got enacted or brought into the House on Monday, our Labour Council voted on February 27th meeting to support the recommendations of First Call BC Child and Youth Advocacy Coalition on strengthening the Employment Standard Act. When the Act was changed in 2003, BC became the only province that does not place legal restrictions on the occupation, tasks, or time of day a child can work. Every single year in the past decade, over 2,000 children under the age of 15 claimed work-related health care costs, and WorkSafe BC paid out over $5 million in injury claims to them. Some of those injuries are life-altering for both the child and their family. First Call's recommendations will also ensure we meet Canada's 2016 International Labour Organization Convention 138 commitments, which include setting the minimum work age at 16 years. On this day of mourning, the Canadian Congress is more than 3 million workers across Canada. One is too many. No one should die on the job. The Labour this year is clear and direct. Workplace deaths are mentally preventable, yet workers continue to be injured and killed on the job. It must stop. As you heard already, as Madam Chair said, just a little bit more about the stats. In 2017, though, 158 workers in BC died from a work-related injury or illness, and there were 152,912 injuries reported. By working together, we can ensure all workers stay safe and our communities are healthy and strong. Local governments should support for the day of mourning is an important building block of this work, and we thank you for your initiations thus far. Everyone here today can help us make a difference, be safety conscious, support accountability measures, and health and safety education in your workplaces. As you have seen in our slides, union leaders and members, government leaders and employers gather together April 28th to mark this important day for workers. Had we been able to, prior to this meeting, I would have invited you to the day morning celebrations that happened at the Pier Park. In some of those photos were from last year's Pier Park in New Westminster to commemorate the day of mourning. But we encourage and we hope that next year, if you have the opportunity, I'd like to preemptively say that you're more than welcome to please attend one of the many ceremonies around the province. That one is especially beautiful. It's right along the water, and they've got the memorial right there as well too. I would also challenge and ask the board as well too. The Day of Mourning Schools program or project. If the schools haven't already invested, I had seen a registration in 2018. I didn't see the registration this year. That some of the secondary schools signed and registered for the Day of Mourning Schools project. And so I would encourage and challenge all of the secondary schools to sign on for next year as well too, to participate in that presentation. It's basically some videos, some other information, some pamphlets that are handed out to school, to kids of that age that are considering entering the workforce. So thank you very much for your time and allowing me to make this presentation together. Any questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation. So the information you provided, especially with the secondary school information, our staff will take back to the principals. I do appreciate the PowerPoint you provided today. It was really informative. And it's great that we had one of our very own DPAC executives. It's amazing when you see somebody outside of the context that you know them. I'm like, he looks familiar, but I can't quite place him. So now I know why. So thank you. It was wonderful to have that local connection with your presentation. So thank you very much, and we will for sure be watching next year for information ahead of time. And I'm very saddened that we couldn't have a meeting ahead of time, that our meetings just didn't line up. But I do thank you for coming to make the delegation to the board, and we look forward to having you back again.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Hey Brian, can you just forward the school resources information to myself, and I'll get it on to instructional services just for those schools that may not have it.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, so we are now on to our action items, which are our superintendent's report. And the first one is our strategic plan for 2019 and 2022, which is very exciting for the board because this really does represent our work. So over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Dykeman. I'm going take probably the better part of to go through this, but that'll include questions. It's an extensive document, and you know what? This is the work that's going to lie ahead for the next 4 years. So I want to do it justice because some of the parties here tonight contributed immensely to the feedback. And you know what? When I show you how daunting this is and the amount of actions going forward, I think I think people appreciate the great work that we've done. I think they certainly appreciate the challenges going forward. And what I think I'll do is divide it up into quadrants where I will present a section, turn it over for questions, and as we move through the four domains. So before I jump into the document itself, you all out there have a copy. This is draft until tonight. The nice part about this is that it actually can be printed in this format. The one we had previously, it couldn't. It was in a Prezi document. You couldn't print it out. It'll exist as probably a flip book on the website for people that access it to easily navigate through. But if people do want to have a hard copy, I'm going to have some printed once it is approved going forward. I have those out there for you because as I go through the document, the screens on here will do a great job of the graphics, but they will not. It'll be difficult to see at times. So I wanted people to be able to kind of follow along if they would like to do so. That is just an example of the work. It's 26 meetings that took place starting in November, right here with the induction of the new board after the election. That we knew we had to set to work, and it was kind of sitting in a meeting here where we laid out the plan going forward to gather feedback and develop this plan. And you can see here we also have a district strategic planning team. We meet every week, and they've been integral to the development of this also. And you can see in terms of our member groups, we've had the LPVPA involved, and I did those presentations through my superintendent's meetings, QP 1851, DPAC, exempt staff, LTA, and after we had a first initial presentation, actually it changed quite dramatically. I have to say that the feedback from all the groups was excellent. In fact, it's a learning process for me too going forward that how appreciative people were just for me to sit down and have a conversation, whether it was with the exec, key members, just to say, hey, let's talk about learning. Let's talk about, how we can work together to make a difference in terms of our kids. And let's just take a moment to chat in terms of where things are at in terms of the district. And on a go-forward basis, I need to do more of that because I know people are very appreciative of it. And it really shaped the document. It shaped the document in terms of our actions. It shaped the document in terms of the acknowledgement of the work we've done going forward. And certainly in terms of the wording and moving it from 5 domains to 4. So I'm very appreciative because people had to give up their time to do that. I also met with some community partners and invited a number of colleagues in to be able to sit and also give a community lens in terms of the document. They really appreciated that, but they also had some great insights to offer in terms of going forward. So we got here, and we got here till tonight. I have to be very thankful in terms of it's one thing for me to gather the information, but in terms of formatting it, that goes beyond the talents of myself for sure. Joe here tonight would be critical to that, and Tony within our communications department, and Claire Pereira. All three, with the graphics you see and the layout, I'm most appreciative of their work in terms of being able to help put this together, because you do want something that can visually grab people and draw them in to take a look further. And I love it. I love the way that it's turned out, and full credit to them. So, themes. And again, I'm going to go through extensively in terms of the different domains, but certainly early learning came up an incredible amount, and the readiness to learn has been a challenge throughout this province, and we're no exception here. And whatever we can do in terms of not even strong starts, but that'll even extend to our preschools and daycares, and that it came up extensively also. What can we do to put our kids in the best place going forward into kindergarten and onward in terms of allowing them to be successful? And Amanda Slade, who works with Instructional Services, does great work there. We have an Early Learning Years Hub, in Willoughby, and we certainly want to see that model extended. But it was a very common theme, came up in all the different categories. Communication, when you have 22,000 kids, over 2,500 staff, this is going to be something we always can work on in terms of, how do we make sure that our parents are informed, and how do we keep day-to-day communication with our all of our partner groups so that they feel valued and feel part of the the input into decision making, and also in terms of supporting us in the decisions going forward. And that's complex. And we'll have a communications plan come out of this. And I know Joe here tonight will be presenting that at the Finance and Facilities meeting, I think, next month. And lots of work to be done there also. So common theme. Mental health, we hear about that continually. We hear about that with our youth. We hear about that with our staff. We hear about the challenges at home. And this is something that cannot be solved by the school district. This is one where community, you have to work together on this. This is a massive challenge. I've noticed an incredible increase here in the 30 years I've been in the profession. And I think, we need to continue to work, very diligently in terms of doing whatever we can to make sure our staff and kids in our community are in a good place there. Curriculum redesign, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I know that it raises all kinds of challenges. And you're talking about a system that was already, I think, one of the best in the world. And kudos to everybody to say, you know what, we're going to continue to not rest on our laurels, but do better here. And I love the flexibility piece. I like the personalization piece. I think these are, I like the fact that you're trying to find ways for kids to connect to their learning and have that relevance. And I acknowledge there's lots of work to do on the communication piece there. That reporting piece continues to be in flux. I think the ministry recognizes that. We've got good people here that continue to work on it. And I commend the teachers in terms of the work they're putting forth in terms of, finding different ways in terms of being able to assess our kids and allowing them to be successful. So tons there. Facilities, twofold. One, how do we keep up in Willoughby? That was a common thread in terms of, and it is challenging. And it's not through a lack of work with Brian and all of his staff daily. It seems like work with the ministry. Advocacy from the trustees has been fantastic. But you always feel like you're a step behind there in terms of trying to stay on top of it. We continue to get schools, and we'll continue to need more. And that is certainly, and with that comes all the infrastructure around safety and working with our community on that going forward also. So a big part. But the other part is I don't live in Willoughby. So what about us? I'm in a building that's older. What are you going to, why can't I have, what exists there in terms of opportunity for our kids? And we've continued to hire staff, additional staff, to meet those needs, and whether it's a coat of paint, whether it's updating the washrooms, whether it's getting them furniture that is also modern in terms of design, whether it's looking at some of the infrastructure within the place to change up to have some of those collaborative spaces, that's all part of it. And again, commend Brian and the work with his staff to going forward on that. And last one is a very common theme is attraction and retention of employees. Very competitive market out there. Langley's probably the top 3 in terms of hiring over the last few years. Langley is a wonderful community to live in, and that helps. But I think also what you can have in terms of employees, in terms of what they have for working conditions, certainly that they can feel valued when they're here. That's certainly something we have to continue to work on. And what are those things that can give you an edge over the communities next door in terms of saying, hey, I'd like to work here. This is the place I want to be. So lots of ideas there. Going forward, and again, a lot of work, and again, commend Barry and his staff in terms of work they've been doing with human resource last few years too. Incredible amount of hiring, and looking forward to other ways that we can continue to stay ahead of the pace there. What I wanted to also talk about is operational feedback, and the strategic plan are broad goals, and these are kind of the big nuggets that we're trying to take on over the course of the next 4 years. And it's a lot of, there's 46 different goals in those domains, so it's daunting. So that already tells you quite a bit. But people had thoughts of also, okay, it's not just these broad goals, but we have ideas of how to operationalize them, how to make those things happen. And at every meeting I went to, I captured notes there. I've shared those notes back to the partner groups. All this is a flavor. I took a couple out of each domain just to tell you, give you a sample of some of the things that came up. But a lot of great ideas, and saying, hey, if you're going to think about this particular area, here's a couple of things you could consider as a district leadership team or as a board going forward. I'm most appreciative of it, and glad I was able to keep that. And that's something that is ongoing. That's something that I can continue to add to. This here will remain predominantly the same over the next 4 years, but the operationalizing of it, hey, anytime there's a new idea that's better, we'll be able to incorporate that in and gather it. So I wanted to make sure people knew that, because they say, well, I gave input, I don't see it in here. If it's an operations piece, you wouldn't see it in here. Okay, but I didn't forget it. Again, some examples, developing measures to determine our success. How do we know we're being successful? You know, and that's not just data, that's the qualitative piece that you can gather in terms of kind of going forward to make sure we're hitting our mark. Lots of things we got to look at there. Physical literacy. This is something particularly K-5 that we have incredible work to do. And you're hearing people say, you know, what are you going to do about it? And you're going to have to put an investment into meeting that. Developing community relationships with respect to the arts. Again, this is something that has been a passion of many. And yes, when we look at those opportunities around certainly careers, and we certainly look around at trades, there's other areas we can look to also. Broadening the outdoor experience. You shouldn't have to just go to the Fort Langley outdoor school, elementary outdoor school, to get that. And you don't have to. That's one place if you want to be fully immersed in it. But any of our schools can take advantage. And sometimes it's just an outdoor garden on site, but also I'm trying to increase access in terms of our local parks, because we're in a great area in terms of being able to do these things. I continue to address fleet replacement and adding equipment to meet the maintenance needs of a growing district. Again, it's something we have to budget for, but as our equipment gets older, it's expensive to try to kind of change this over, and you have to have the resources and plan ahead to be able to do that. Work with daycares to expand opportunities. We've heard from our provincial government that there's a commitment there, but the impact it's going to have on this community, where there's already a lack of space, we're going to need incredible help to be able to carry this forward. So there is certainly a will to do it, but we certainly are going to need some help going forward there. Came up throughout. More training for TTOCs upon hiring. You know, what can we do to make sure they've got a lot of young people? You want to make sure they stay with this career, and the more mentorship and help you can give before they enter and upon entering, continue that on. And more on boundaries training. We have a world around social media that, many of our colleagues out there got to make sure they keep those lines in terms of so that they don't run themselves into difficulty. So these are just a sample, but I want to let you know that these are the types of things that people were contributing in terms of saying, you know what, you're going to have to be mindful of these things as you go forward. Okay. And on that note, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the document itself, and then I'll stop after the education one. We'll break it up for some questions as we go forward. And I'll just get ready just to set that. Set it up here. So again, it'll be front page. That is obviously you want to have kids. That's what we're all about. Right on the front of this document. And again, 2019 to 2022 is what we'll be looking at. The artwork there, and as you flip over in terms of that first page, that's out of Aldergrove. Those are actually a set of tiles that a number of kids all contributed to make that happen. I love it. And that one really just gives you the district context. So this will be available under the board. You go on our website, and you'll be able to scroll down, and you'll be able to pull this document up and work through it. And you'll be able to print off a copy if you wish also. But it does let you know that we're sitting around 143,000 people within our communities of the city and the township, 22,487 students, and 43 schools and growing, with a budget, hard to believe, is around $250 million. So, you know what, that is, you look at it when I started to now, and the amount of incredible change that's taken place there. This is something we don't need to go back to community on. They developed it with us, and I still think it's a great way in terms of putting out our vision and our mission and our 4 quadrants of what's important to us and our values. It takes when you go down a branding route, or when you're trying to kind of make sure the community buys into this. This isn't something that you accomplish in a year. It takes quite a bit of time. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I've really noticed in terms of how many people will refer to this. It's a great guide. It's something that is aspirational. It's something we continue to strive for. And I like the fact that, again, it is a graphic that I really, truly believe draws people in. And we've been able to refer to those core values, and I'm going to be honest with you, meeting all four of those can be really challenging at times. And, but they're a good guide, and they're a good reminder of the work that we need to do and the framework we want to do it in. So great work there. So at least the strategic plan needs some communities. They haven't even got that. So if you're starting on that road, you got a long way before you can get to actually the work itself. In terms of, again, the vision, I like that in terms of, again, an innovative, inspiring, unified learning community. And on that one, too, it breaks it down in terms of the 4 quadrants. Again, our framework for enhancing student learning, that's what we're all about in terms of our guide. It's a document in and of itself that also exists on the website. I know Joe's working on that with Tony in terms of changing up the way that is presented. And it's broken into the quadrants of relevant, meaningful choices for students, and igniting a lifelong passion for learning. Learners are knowledgeable, skilled, and innovative. Learning takes place through flexible and connected environments, and our schools foster an inclusive and accepting culture. And we work every day on all those 4 quadrants, and again, amazing work by all of our staff in that particular area, and that is from our I.D.E.A Summit. That again, May 8th, as was mentioned by Susan, we'll be doing that again, and Brady there in the corner, he's done a lot of work with the fuel bag program in terms of helping families. So again, like to get the kids out there in terms of stuff. Athletics vision, something that's been also an incredible amount of work that many and men have taken on with coaches, and twofold. How do we get people that are willing to do this work anymore? It's after school and stuff. And how do you find a way to kind of get people to realize it's very rewarding work, but it's extra work? And how do you get people out there? But also, we wanted athletics to be more than about championships. We wanted to be about, you know what, there's an experience you get out of being part of athletics that you can be very fortunate in terms of the skills you gather from that. And certainly the mentoring is really important from our coaches. And so this graphic you see here, and that took, I think John would have seen some of the earlier ideations of it, was this is evolved. But where we've landed is incredible. I really love it. That is going to be, it's right now in every secondary gym, middle school, and it will be in every elementary by the end of next year. And we're going to have those up. And that's the reminder of what we want any athlete to know, that when you're with our school district and our coaches to know, that's what you're after. You're after those 4 core values. Don't forget about that while you have those kids that have their experience, and building a lasting legacy. That's what we want to be known for. Done a lot to recognize our coaches. I know Mel has been working with the group too in terms of our athletic banquet this year. And we make sure we acknowledge people for years of service within that. We provide them a meal as your guest speaker. There's all kinds of acknowledgement, and we have our own wall of distinction down at the Langley Event Center to really acknowledge people with often 30 years plus of coaching that have made a difference. But if you did not exemplify those core values, you're not going to be part of that, because we're saying that is an absolute critical piece going forward. So great work, lots more to happen there, but I think this has been really nicely tied to the vision going forward, and will continue as we go forward. Educational opportunities. This document is broken into a couple of parts. The first year you roll it out with your new set of trustees, you want to roll it out acknowledging the good work that's also happened. Because otherwise people always say, again, Gord, you just continue to ask for more. Why can't you ever acknowledge the good work that's been done? And there's been a ton of great work. Some of it completed, some of it ongoing. But next year, when we would go through this document, we'll focus strictly on the actions and how we're doing. And again, we'll be moving on from what has been done in the past. But we did want to spend some time there in terms of the work. We've done a great deal with our Aboriginal community. Both a tribute to Mike Morgan and also currently Mike Pugh. The work they've done there around the enhancement agreement, the relationships we have with our Aboriginal community, those are unique. You do not see that through everywhere in the province in terms of how well they're willing to work with us and to make a difference in the lives of those kids. And the reconciliation ceremonies have been a great part of it, the language classes also, and recently the photographs in the Fort Langley that they put up of a number of key figures within Kwantlen Nation, they're pretty powerful in terms of if you haven't had a chance to see that. I mean, that you don't get if you're not working together on it. The alignment of plans, trying to say, hey, we have district goals. We expect to see those as school goals. You can do other things, but you're going to at least make sure you're doing the district ones. Absolutely paramount. And then add to that. We also have it in terms of lining up with our enhancement agreement, and we also in terms of our administrative growth plans. It all ties in terms of, we feel it's that concentrated focus that it's going to make an incredible difference. Curriculum and classroom structures, again, this is the balanced literacy guides, fantastic. We've had phenomenal feedback. Credit again to Dawn with the work she's done as director there. And I know Woody and Mel have been integral in terms of instructional services, a lot of great stuff. And that's what gets you up in the morning in terms of the redesigned curriculum. And I know that part of that balanced assessment piece is also a big goal. The modernization of learning environments I've talked about, instructional coaches in school. The tech plan, just the stuff. The stuff itself is incredibly expensive. And again, credit to Brian in terms of putting us in a place financially that we can be able to do this. But we've got some heavy work still to do around how to utilize it well. That's for our students and that's for our staff. Because you give them the tools without the training with it, and you're not going to get as much out of that experience. So we are working on how that plan can be met at the school level and try to how to do that well, because certainly just having a couple of people at the district level to run around and do that will never be enough. So how do you find a way to build that infrastructure in? That's probably the next phase we're in right now. Inclusion and diversity, totally commend the work of Renge. I mean, you know, she is absolutely wonderful. And in terms of our LGBTQ community and celebrating diversity, and you know what, it continues. And in terms of safe schools, all of it, we're lucky. We have her here and commend her on the work. We'd want to make sure we acknowledge that. And also in our learning support services department, I know Mike is totally revisioning that in terms of the work we want to do to make sure that our students with diverse abilities can feel included and have great opportunities that they can enjoy at any of their sites going forward. And last one there in terms of summer session, no, the balanced calendar conversation is one thing. It certainly got people's attention. And I think it got them to realize that there's some opportunities that we could take advantage of in the summer that they didn't think of before. And I think they just thought that's that remedial thing. You know, if you're doing something wrong, go off in secondary. And now it's something grade 1 to 12 that, you know, about 5,000 plus kids take advantage of. Great work by Ron Stair and others that have done this, and Tulik Mann. So that's in terms of established and ongoing in terms of our framework financing learning great. In terms of actions going forward, I've alluded to the fact that in terms of literacy, no opting out. This doesn't mean numeracy isn't valuable. It is. But every single school is going to be committed to making sure our kids can read. And particularly if you can read at grade level at grade 3, it puts you at an incredible benefit over those that are not in terms of graduating. And the stats there, yes, that doesn't mean if you're not reading grade 3, you won't. And it doesn't mean that you're automatically guaranteed you will, but the stats are pretty clear that you're giving children a great advantage, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, that if we can really focus on making sure that they are reading at grade level, that again, we dramatically increase their chances of graduating, and that's important. You have to be literate and numerate in this world to be successful. So again, a ton of work there. What I like is every action plan says we're going to be focused on it. They've personalized it. It's not about stats, even though it's a stat here saying we want to get it to 80% and ultimately like to get everyone there. But I think in terms of the work going forward there, you know what, I like the fact you put a name beside that child. That we know these kids in our building, and what are we specifically going to do to help that particular child get through has made a difference. And the other one is graduation. That doesn't fall just to grade 12 teachers. It's K to 12. And we have 3 targeted groups that, you know what, we can do more for it to make a difference here in terms of our graduation rates. It's certainly around our Aboriginal community, and certainly students with diverse abilities and children in care. Those are 3 groups that have, you know, certainly faced some pretty significant challenges, and that we need to do what we can to meet that. So we'd like to get our 6-year Dogwood completion rate up to 93%. We sit somewhere right now around the 88% mark. We know we can do better, and we're going to go after it going forward. Creating equity, there's some of the other bullets. Yeah, it shouldn't matter where you go. You should get a great educational experience anywhere in Langley. The middle school program, continue to look at, we've had conversations there about what are the next steps. There's some financial issues there in terms of trying to kind of get that in structurally, but to continue to do what we can to make sure that that's a good experience for kids and how to kind of leverage that out elsewhere. Early learning I've talked about. Career opportunities. It's one of the 3 pillars. Academic, social, emotional, and careers. And wow, there's a ton. It's going to really be, it's something that we're trying to make sure kids are aware of, certainly even in the elementary end. But when you hit the grade 9 to 12, there's got to be a lot more there in terms of infrastructure to kind of make sure kids are being able to chase those dreams. Balanced assessment, I've talked about there. This is critical. Kids need to be able to have more than one way to demonstrate their understanding of their learning, and hasn't always been the case, and there's still quite a bit of work to do on that one. The tech plan I've talked about, professional development. We have to make sure we stay committed there to put our staff in a good place to be successful. Shared belief that all kids have gifts which can be nurtured. They need to have a positive legacy. That's strength-based approach to learning support services. I love it. A new 5-year Aboriginal Enhancement Agreement, working with Mike Pugh on that one. Equitable support and equipment accessible for all students, again, so that every child can go to school and be successful. And I know that Mike's been really committed to trying to make sure kids can always go to their home school and doing whatever he can to overcome those obstacles. Safe schools in terms of making sure that a lot of the stuff around erase falls within that, and the harassment and bullying piece to make sure that we're meeting that mandate. School-wide emotional learning models to support students, again with Renge, and implementation of the redesign. We've talked about the communicating student learning needs a ton of work provincially and here. And we now have a new BC tripartite education agreement that Mike Pugh has started out on, and again increase the number and diversity of our international students. So again, a ton of stuff with just even that one domain. I've chatted for a ton. I'm going to leave it open for questions before I move to the last three.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I will just see if there's any questions here on this section. Okay, we have Trustee Todd.
Well, okay. It's a question, but also a gamble. So education is a people organization, and I always kind of, it raises my ire when we talk about a business, because it's an organization. It's dedicated to advancing the social cause, and we're doing something. We are creating a legacy for the future. And when I read a document like this, I always start by saying it begins with people, and we need to thank the people involved, and those are the people at the table across from us, because it's on their shoulders that our organization thrives. So I want to, in a small way, and I know they've had, time at the table. They've been asked for their input, so I do want to thank for their cooperation, their collaboration as we develop the strategic plan. First off, I also liked some of the work specifically around the athletics vision, and again, it's the process of sports. Sports can be character building. There's much to the process, and yes, there are times when sports gets corrupted or sports gets hijacked, but by and large, sports is a growth mindset. That's what it's all about. And when you have great coaches, you have great programs. The question, and I'm not sure where it came from, I have for you, but the shared belief we have that all students have gifts, and maybe it comes from the First Nations and that, but all students have gifts which can be nurtured, celebrated, leading to a positive legacy for the future. That's poetic. So I'm not sure who came up with that, but I'm curious.
Thank you, Trustee Todd. That came from Mike Mourning in terms of, and I should put his department, Learning Support Services. I absolutely agree with you. I love it too. And where we'll look at, here's one that'll be offers some challenges in terms of the measurement piece, but aspirational. Why wouldn't you want that for every child? So, but as you know, Mike has also been immersed in the Aboriginal culture, so I'm sure that played a part in that.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next speaker on the list is Trustee Perot.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Firstly, I love this layout. It's awesome. Under the strategic plan, this whole mosaic thing, wouldn't it be brilliant on the internet, on our website, that was a tile puzzle? I think that would be awesome. Anyways, that's just my. Yeah, I looked right at her. Regarding educational opportunities under summer session, I'm interested in understanding under the conversation of inclusion and having that growth mindset and ensuring we're having equitable support. We've talked about creating equity and educational opportunities in the document, ensuring access. Are we going to have educational assistance available for all summer session learners that we are making the programs available for?
A good question. They certainly will be offered. I think the key is in terms of availability of SCAs. You can't. We did have a number of SCAs work there last year. We've increased the hours there too. Was a factor. But the reality is some would rather have the summer off, which I get. And I think some people also, while they only work well with that SCA, and we have to say, well, I can't force that. Should they wish to work, then absolutely you need to know that around the province, many districts do not. They're very restrictive in terms of their summer session programs, in terms of who can access them. And what we've tried to do is make that available to everyone. So staffing at times has been a little bit of a challenge, but for the most part, we've been pretty good there.
Okay, thank you. I have Vice Chair Coburn.
I just have two. Can I have two? Okay. So to the summer sessions, do we draw a distinction between kids who have to go to summer session to pass a course that they've failed versus kids who are extremely keen or whose parents are keen to have them in summer session? Is there a distinction there?
There is in terms of what's offered, because you're right, we have a remedial, and that's you need to go because you weren't successful. That actually is quite small. And it's actually, I'm going to even say, probably 80% is more. We wanted to access the unique opportunities. A great example of that one is Langley Fine Arts. There's some students that can't go to fine arts that would like to do something there. Well, in the summer, they can go there and do something in 3 weeks in terms of a passion area that they want. Same way, we have kids at some sites put on a play. So you've really got some, and you also have an outdoor program. So, but those are all around. We want to encourage our kids to try out some different things.
Okay, so to that question, what about equitable access to those programs? Because those sites often aren't on bus routes. So for a lot of kids, they don't go to choice programs because they're not in a position where their parent or parents can get them there. So in the summer, is there ease of access to these? Or are they still less accessible to people from particular living situations?
So unlike the rest of the province, we're one of the few that actually offers numerous sites. Many, because for financial reasons, say it's one spot only. We've tried to at least make one site available per community and offer a variety of things in each of those spots. The only one that shifts from park to park is the outdoor program, and parents would be responsible for getting them to that site. But that doesn't mean we have to run the outdoor program that way. I'm thinking of even kids in the city. We have an incredible area around the Nickel-Meckle floodplain that we could say, hey, why can't that outdoor experience be there? Nothing's stopping us from that, and that's what we're trying to encourage. We have to have, all these are teachers that have a passion that want to, if they want to do that, we've said we're wide open to it, but not in all cases, you can't always find that. But we're trying to encourage that, yeah, wherever you are, you can access it.
Okay, so my other question, and we have passionate teachers, especially coaches. So my question to you is, since the athletics vision and the growing of the appreciation for the coaches, the volunteer coaches, have you noticed an increase of A, volunteer coaches, and B, morale around coaching and volunteerism in the district since we started to recognize them at a banquet and put more attention to that aspect of extracurricular education and appreciation?
Morale, yes. Again, it would certainly be our building administrators and Mel and Woody would be both more tied to that. in terms of expressing that they are appreciative of the efforts, because there's just been a couple things there. It's not only about recognizing them, but it's also been around making sure that the transportation's covered, making sure that if there are fees to be part of an association, or you get to a provincials to help out, we've taken that financial piece off so that schools, it's expensive to have equipment and uniforms and all the rest of it, and we saw a little bit of have and have not. So we thought, well, we take that off, that gives everybody the opportunity there. So what I'm hearing is that people have really noticed that. Do we still see a number of people from the community that are involved? Yes. But I would, again, and I don't know, Mel or Woody, whether either one of you would comment on what you've noticed in terms of the athletics piece, in terms of the volunteers, but you feel free to comment.
I think one of the things that we've noticed is the coaches that have been around for a little while are the ones that appreciate it the most. I think because for a long time in our district we haven't had anything like this, and so to have a formal function that recognizes our volunteer coaches has been something that I think one of our most experienced coaches, who's going to be honored this year, said that really closed the circle for him, and in fact was actually in tears when he found out that he was going to be honored. So we'll give you an example of what people are feeling.
Okay, so that's the last question for education, and Superintendent, I guess now it's on to the community partnerships section.
Thank you, and good question. I mean, that's what kind of all about in terms of the educational piece. Appreciate the questions there, and you can see a lot of the work. We're going to turn to our community partners, and this one here, the graphic that you got. I love this. I love the kids playing out in the mud. I'm sure the parents of those children are happy too. But in terms of when you look at that, what a great graphic in terms of getting out. Kids love being outdoors, and I love the quote. And by the way, I should mention that Mike Pugh commented on it. Our district principal for Aboriginal programming. When you see our children are our most precious resource, that comes from the Aboriginal community. And we've put those interspersed throughout the document. He said, hey, don't just put them in one place, kind of work them through. I like that. On the community piece, the goal to strengthen relationships and communication with community groups while providing opportunities for students to continue to contribute to the community. We don't do this alone. And I think this is a great piece on our core value and that we've included here. What they did ask, and a big change, is we used to list all the different community agencies we worked with, and we traditionally missed one or two, or it changed name. And the feedback was, don't do that, Gord. Just capture by category the various groups you work with, and we'd just rather be invited to the table and have the conversations than have you not have us necessarily listed there, or we change it. So good feedback from them. The school district has worked with the community partners to establish the Early Learning Hub. It's a model in terms of BC that people are trying to emulate. In fact, we're going to have people from the ministry coming out to visit us shortly because they've heard good things there, and we're trying to see the same thing take place in Aldergrove and the city in terms of going forward. The Langley Youth Resource Center, our district, we were big. Our kids in terms of, and our staff in terms of really pushing for that. Made an incredible difference there, and it's still, I was talking to Lauren Roberts in terms of Encompass the other day, in terms of him, still very appreciative of our efforts there to have that as a resource area, and also a place if some of our students run into issues around homelessness. Outdoor ed, again, that's one we've made some incredible inroads in, and safety concerns. Those are things that they expect trustees, they expect our staff to liaison with the township and the city to express our concerns around safety, if those are the case, and they do appreciate our advocacy there, and we do that as a group. On the action side of this one, again, people have said they like a little bit on the early learning, continue to do the work there. The mental health initiatives piece, the community said, hey, we're here, you need us, we need to work together, how can we do this? The district communications plan will fall within this. Joe has been meeting with people from that sector. I don't know of too many districts that consult more than this one, but we have quite a framework we utilize within that, and trying to get our community to understand what consultation means. It's not about a vote. It's about we're heading down a certain path, getting feedback in terms of how can we do this as effectively as possible, and having their voice within that process. And I do commend the efforts. It's time consuming, for sure. But I do think it's a way to build up trust within the community, and again, I applaud our staff for doing that. The liaison meetings, certainly going forward, DPAC, again, a partner there that we want to make sure that we keep a good relationship with and continue to work with, as we have a rep here even tonight with Brian, most appreciative. The Human Dignity Coalition, Balamorthy is certainly a champion of that, principal of Walnut Grove. He's done great work there, working with the community on that one too, in terms of being able to recognize all of our different cultures. Continue to work with community agencies with respect to hiring to diversity. Really appreciate the inroads we've made there. We can continue to work with our partner groups on this, which is very appreciative of. Post-secondary institutions, they're involved a lot with their entrepreneurial activities and again, also our apprenticeship and other post-secondary liaison opportunities for kids. Mentors, this is something we want to build upon with places like Rotary and the Chamber and others, because you know what, they want to know how to play a part here, and this is a natural for us, particularly around the careers piece, I.D.E.A Summit, things like that. The Langley Youth Resource Center, we don't want to forget to continue to support it, expanding the Learning Years Hub I mentioned. And again, the daycare, this is really challenging for us because there's expectations there for us to do this, but having the financial resources and the space to do it is difficult. And we've talked to the ministry several times on this. I think there's a lot of work that still lies ahead. We're committed. We're just saying, hey, we could use some help. And I think the other one we've seen is a lot more focus from our youth on social purpose, which we got to commend youth on that, is that how many of them are saying they want to find a way to make a difference. And you've certainly seen that through the Youth Philanthropy Initiative, Service Above Self youth program. That is going ahead Thursday night as a Sassy Awards. And our youth are well represented there. What is that about? It's about giving to community and finding ways to do that. The I.D.E.A Summit, all those involved, a portion of the proceeds goes towards a particular cause that they believe would make a difference. So that's great with the kids, and I think great for the district to give those opportunities. Just a few of the examples going forward on community. I'll turn it over for questions.
Thank you, Superintendent. I do have a speakers list. Trustee Todd, me first. Okay, so Vice Chair Coburn.
Yeah, so first, I just have one comment, a question. I'd like to point out, in terms of, we get this quite a bit, why don't you just put daycare spaces in our schools? And so, just for the benefit of those who might not understand this, under one government, our classes got extremely big, our composition was changed, we had too much space. We were told to fill up our schools or we would lose them, so we put in daycares. And then the language was restored, our class sizes changed. We didn't have any room, we had to push out daycares. We were essentially monsters. So we, as a school district and as a board, are committed to childcare spaces, except we don't have the space, and a lot of the grants are for only new spaces, and so it's put us in a tricky position, but I do know that the district is committed to making sure that there are spaces. So, but my question is, you talked about an outdoor program, and you talked about the city, and there's lots of data and anecdotal evidence on who goes outside, who gets what, where, strong ties to socioeconomic demographics and access to outdoor. So what do you need from us, or what is it going to take to develop a program in the city? Because like you said, there are so many natural habitats, and so this is a group of people who could really, really benefit even on a mental wellness level.
So great question. And so I think one of the approaches we can take, a teacher out at Parkside, Carly Smart, Woody's quite familiar with her. And the intention of that outdoor program at Fort Langley Elementary wasn't to be, if you want the outdoor experience, you have to be in that program. It was also meant to be a bit of a demonstration site that any teacher could go down and say, hey, what you're doing there, I could actually do some of that in my school. Which Carly took that approach. So she met with people on her staff that were interested. I joined her out at Campbell Valley Park recently. She had all the grade 2s and 3s, I think, that were out there at the time. And she committed to saying, hey, I'm going to do X number of lessons over the course of the year where I can take this great experience for kids. They love it. Mm-hmm. As she said, it's actually interesting in terms of behavior issues with kids don't take place when you're kind of outside. So what we can do as a district, because I think within the city there's some remarkable places you can go, and you can go by foot to get there, is making sure staff have the tools they need and the professional development, so they can go, hey, I can take my class at Nickelmeckle of grade 2 and I can do this, which is more realistic than me trying to set up a separate satellite throughout. And I think that's where I'd like to see us go. We do have outdoor kits that we purchased. There's I think one or more available per school. That just gave you a little bit of stuff you can utilize in terms of with kids to get outside. We can expand on those. But I think the Pro-D, so I'm trying to get some more teachers out to see what's happening in some of these other sites. So if we do that, I think we can make a big difference within the city.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Superintendent. So I just have a follow-up from before. We, throughout our strategic planning over the last number of years, one of the conversations that would come up quite frequently would be the conversation about encouraging mentorship and work experience opportunities for our youth. Now, our board's very, very fortunate for the relationship we've developed with the Chamber. As chair, I've been invited to present to the Chamber on the initiatives going on in our district, which is so exciting because we have this amazing community that wants to step forward and support our youth. I know as we move towards the changes in the curriculum, work experience opportunities are becoming something that we are trying to encourage more and more. So I'm wondering how with the strategic plan and how with your work as superintendent in the department's support for work experiences being sort of how you're looking at that and what your vision is for that going forward.
Yeah, so one of the things you got to do is provide some staffing. And so you have to, within the schools, we have teachers with work experience blocks. We also have career coordinators in each of our buildings also, so to give kids access to that. And I think we have staff here. We're trying to add some administrative support to it also in terms of that careers department, because they can help foster some of these conversations you're having. You have to have people getting out there and have the time to have the conversations and find a way to draw them in. I know that Don, in terms of his director, there's really committed to taking a real run at this over the next year. And we are trying to add some additional staffing in terms of to do just that, to make that to take place. So there's out there, actually, I'll tell you what, compared to 5 or 6 years ago, there's quite a bit more infrastructure. But where the province wants to go is saying it's one of the 3 pillars. I've said to them, I said, where's the investment? We need way more there to help us in terms of supporting this. So.
Okay, so is there anything further, because as you mentioned, the province does have this push, which really the infrastructure and the funding isn't complete for that to be implemented fully. Is there anything further the board can do to support that work?
Yeah, I think what I will do on that particular one is in the next couple of months with our strategic plan team, working with Woody, Mel, and Don and others in terms of, and our career department to kind of, they're developing, it's budget time. So they start to say, okay, here's some of the things we're going to need if you want us to kind of hit that next level. And I think to bring those things here, I think would be important for you to hear that. And I know they'd be most appreciative of your support as we head down that road.
Okay, thank you. I do not, I lied. I have one more speaker on the list. He didn't take his spot before, but we'll let him go. Trustee Todd.
Thank you. What our chair mentioned earlier spurred something in me, and it was I know we had discussions particularly about aviation, and just every day as I drive by the airport at Langley, it looks like exciting things are happening with our airport, and that's one of the community partnerships that hopefully, and I know there is some exploratory work done in this area, and I'm assuming that's also covers under the umbrella of the whole career. Is that correct?
Correct. Langley Education Center has a program that's offered in terms of the aviation with a teacher there. The other plan is that's going to be in terms of a hub in terms of helicopters. I think it's planned on being the 2nd largest in North America when that's completed. And that's being able to do every single aspect you can imagine in terms of the helicopter industry. We've talked to BCIT because they're missing that. They don't have that as part of their program. If you go to Richmond, it's not about helicopters. And we're trying to say, hey, why don't you kind of get involved here in terms of there's the infrastructure side, and then there's also in terms of if you like to be involved with the flight part of it too. So yeah, I think we're positioned nicely in our location, and in the next few years, I think that's something we can really explore even more. So.
Okay, Superintendent, so we do have two more parts of the plan. I know you mentioned it would be quite lengthy, which is wonderful. It's an important part of our work, but we'll move on because we also have other lengthy things too. So off to finance and facilities planning.
You mean there's more stuff after this? You're kidding. Let's go to it. So everyone's favorite finance and facilities. That up. We're in terms of a number of goals that our Secretary Treasurer Brian Isley is working on in related to this department, and Shin. I should also mention Shin. Goals: aligning financial resources with educational goals. I love the fact that they've incorporated that in terms of their visioning, which is great. And maintaining and improving facilities in support of students through an efficient and effective allocation of resources. Maximizing utilization of facilities, and again, just saying, hey, we've got these spaces, let's use them as much as we can. A plan for future facility needs, requirements to meet the changing enrollment of schools, minimizing disruption, there's a big one, while addressing facility changes. They do a lot of work there to try to pace that work out in terms of a way that will be least disruptive to students, and great working relationships, with the township and city in terms of emergency preparedness. Established again, I think financially we're fortunate. We've been in a surplus situation for a number of years. That's around solid fiscal management, and continue to find a way to maximize those dollars we get out. We've been drawing our surplus down a bit each year in terms of making sure that we can get that out to schools. The long-term facilities plan for capital projects. You're going to hear in terms of our 5-year capital plan. Brian will be bringing this out to the next few years, setting our priorities. Willoughby certainly is one, just because of its growth in terms of trying to make sure that we're getting in line for the schools there. But there's also all kinds of other improvements we do under capital there that falls under there. When you think about it, R.C. Garnett addition, the LLSS right sizing, R.E. Mountain Secondary School, Peter Ewart Middle. Wow, that's a ton of stuff to take on in a very short period of time. And land for future schools, Southwest Yorkson and Northeast Latimer. And again, we're waiting for that announcement on that elementary school shortly. And BC Hydro initiatives, a ton there. Actions going forward, and I think this is one that the trustees really are committed to and have wanted to make sure this is a bullet, that working collaboratively with the ministry to establish a more effective funding model for districts experiencing rapid student enrollment growth. We're just that feels a little bit penalized by the fact that we're growing because we have to bring so much in terms of the financial side to meet this. And right now, if you're in a place that is staying static in terms of enrollment, you're actually accruing more benefits than one under growth. And again, appreciate, Tristan and Brian and others that continue to advocate that, and the advocacy here in terms of his trustees. Continue to work with the ministry to acquire funding to build additional schools. Again, getting that accumulated surplus out to students, establishing sustainable cost structures, modernizing facilities beyond just Willoughby. We've talked a lot about that. I mentioned the 5-year capital plan, implementing the recommendations of the risk assessment review. We'll talk about that more probably in the next year, about the recommendations that came out of that and what we're going to continue to do to make sure that we're not at the risk of a cyber, incident or anything else like that kind of going forward. Working with the ministry, City of Langley, and Township around the daycare. We talked about that already. And again, the other ones too, in terms of hydro savings and paper savings, they're not kind of the most exciting things to kind of put out there, but they make a real difference. And it's one in terms of you have to really shift the way people's behavior. And you don't shift people's behavior by just saying it. It takes a long time to kind of get those accomplished. But again, the savings go to kids. So we try to say, if we save here, we can give here. And it's trying to kind of make people, see people have that kind of connection. So a lot of good work's happened. Lots of stuff is still underway, and more than glad to take questions on that section. And I know Mr. Isley would also.
Okay. All right. Well, we wait and see if anybody else has any questions. I do have a couple comments. Worked up when you talked about working with the ministry, collaboratively. It's one of my most favorite parts. Is
like that.
Tracking the minister down. Let's remember over here, Langley. But one thing that I think that as a board going forward with talking about risks associated financially that I think we need to be mindful of is, I'm so excited about the capital projects that we have opening, but oftentimes we're building to deal with over capacity in some areas, but not fully, and so we're moving our population around. but our costs go up associated with those specific things. So if we open a new school and we move, say, 200 children from one school to another, we know there'll be more coming in, but in the meantime, we're now paying for 2 schools with the same amount of funding coming in. And as we're in this awkward growth where we definitely need more schools as soon as possible, we also have to be aware of the fact that we're going to be doing more with less. And that is a significant risk for us. And that's something that when the ministry sent out their letter talking about long-term facilities planning going forward, I hope that the minister and the ministry will be open to, feedback from this board that, you also need to look at how you're going to manage growth better. It's not just these smaller districts with declining enrollment where you're taking part of our funding and shifting it up there. You also have to deal with these rapid growth districts, which Langley is the 6th largest growing district, and we are in desperate need for more capital funding, but we also need to look at how funding's coming. And this idea that we're a corporation and we're going to contribute to a school that is being built, it flies entirely in the face of education being a public good that as taxpayers we invest in. That's not responsible stewardship of the taxpayers' money to sort of send the money to the district and then have the district contribute it back into a capital project that those provincial taxes should be addressing. I mean, the ministry should be funding the schools. We aren't able to hold, a bake sale or open a new department in our building to generate funds to create a new school. We are not in the business of generating revenue towards capital projects. We're in the business of educating students in Langley. And so this idea that we're going to contribute $23 million here, and what really concerned me is that we are, when we were at the BCSTA this weekend, there were school districts saying we don't have a surplus, but we were still told to take money out of their operations budget to contribute towards the building of a school. That is completely unacceptable. And when we are done drawing down our surplus, if you want to call it that, which actually becomes our capital contribution fund, it will be interesting to see where the ministry's idea is that we're going to generate millions of dollars out of operations towards a capital project. I think that that's entirely unacceptable. Trustee Ward.
There you go. It's about time to learn. I was going to follow up with a really small thing, but I'd like to not really hardly mention it. Well, I'm going to mention it anyhow. Just with respect to energy use and paper savings, things like that, I think it's important that when we move ahead with these initiatives that we consider the overall net benefit, net cost. For example, with respect to report cards, that one I've heard from a lot of parents, including myself, how the old method of passing it around, you get it and you can pass it, and versus the new I.D.E.A version and getting passwords and things like that. I don't know if the net benefit, just because we can kind of pat ourselves on the back and say that we're moving ahead in a technological way and we're saving trees, and it amounts to so many times per year times 22,000 students, I think is pretty negligible compared to the net benefit of kind of being proud of what kids have done. So I just, my caution for us as we move forward is obviously we want to advance forward as fast as we can in positive ways, but we have to take measured steps, that's all.
And just a follow up to that. I think in fact we're talking to Joe on this particular one too, around the communicating student learning piece. That first of all, you have to make sure it's in a language parents can understand. It can't be daunting in terms of a 25-page document. But I think also, I think where the technology comes into it, that if it's a frustrating experience to access it, you're quite right. And trying to make sure that we can find ways to educate the public about how to access this information in an easy way. And also, why I kind of want to ultimately get there is because communicating student learning should not be I'll get it 3 times a year. It should be something ongoing. And I know a lot of teachers like to share formative pieces out, for an example, kind of ongoing too. And the easiest way for them to do that is certainly often electronically too. But if we have to do some education on it, that's on us to do that, and we've got to figure out a plan to kind of go forward with that. That wasn't so much around paper saving, that was around maybe we can get them more information kind of going forward. But anyways, some comments on that.
For sure. I've got Trustee Ward on follow-up and then Trustee Todd on a question.
Yeah, Gord, I respect that. I think that that makes a lot of sense. You know, we got to find better ways of doing things, but you know, in the old school way of, you know, it's kind of like the Willy Wonka ticket for, you know, the pass. You'd pass, it was a valuable thing, and you know, whether it's more times throughout the year or whatever, it's just one of those things where kids could have a lot of kind of show it around. And grandma and grandpa, when we're trying to, we talk about socioeconomic and access and inclusivity and that sort of thing. Along those lines, not everybody has equal access to tech. And so I'd like to see where we advance forward, but we also keep the positive things from the past. That's all. But thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Ward. Trustee Todd.
So one area where I see an opportunity to work collaboratively with the ministry, it's mentioned under the actions, is certainly around funding for seismic, and I'm assuming as we work through our 5-year capital plan, we will be addressing some of the seismic, because if I'm reading the provincial government correctly, I do think they put an emphasis in that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll speak to that later. We have received a response letter, so there is some stuff on seismic in there, but it is an initiative on the ministry's part to address as many of these seismic issues as possible. The problem is that the studies that were done 10 years ago were very high-level studies, and I know that they're finding as they go across the province that the work is more involved than what they thought. So it has slowed down while they're putting up more dollars. The projects are costing a lot more.
Okay, thank you. So, Superintendent, back. Vice Chair Coburn.
Just to the two things real quick. With the report cards, I got a printed report card. So, but to Trustee Ward's point, and I totally relate, because I've commented before on reporting out and no consistency with. Each teacher can use which platform they like, and you're getting these emails. So as we move towards this way, for all the reasons that we're doing it, and I don't know if it's possible, is there any way of imagining that a child's ID would follow with them throughout their entire education career? Because as they change teachers or change schools, you get a new password, you get a new access. If they've got this online fee, they've got that online fee, and you've got 3 kids at 3 different schools and 3 different passwords, and you're working and you have to pay your fees, and you can't keep all your passwords straight, and then you need a reset. This has happened a lot to people I've heard. And so this becomes a very frustrating endeavor. So it's not at all convenient for parents. And I do think that sometimes we forget that we do serve parents. And although it's convenient for us on our end, and although it's saving us money, it's not really meeting the needs of our customer group, for lack of a better word. And so it would be really nice to see some consistency on A, what platform they report out on, and B, just having some continuity with that ID that follows a child through their, and I don't know how much work that would be. And then secondly, in terms of facilities and updating our fleets, with the talk of seatbelts and school buses, if that comes down from the federal government that we need to have this, who pays for it?
I would hope it would come from some ministry body somewhere, because for us it would be the millions of dollars to do retrofitting. Not all of our buses are even retrofittable. They have to be bolted down to the frame, and not all of them are able to do that. It would be very costly for us to do that.
All right, thank you. So, Superintendent, we are on to Human Resources now, which is the last section.
Thank you. Our final quadrant, Human Resources. And again, Assistant Superintendent Barry Bunyan will certainly be able to in terms of questions on this one also. Back in terms of this one too, again, goals remaining competitive we talked about that one, and attracting and retaining staff, establishing equity and diversity in hiring, promoting and supporting the physical, emotional, and mental well-being of all school district staff and a respectful and safe working environment, promoting excellence and best practices for all employees, and also effectively communicating with our staff and school communities with respect to the district website. Establish an ongoing, certainly in terms of recruitment strategies. I know we have done a number of different things over the last few years and continue to explore those opportunities, and also around the retainment of staff. Innovative creative solutions for implementation of the restored language. We've worked a lot in terms of with our partner groups, particularly LTA, in terms of remedy solutions and in terms of increased hiring for resource teachers and resources. Modernizing systems with respect to health and safety training. Admin practice and Langley training for our administrators. We have an extensive program, particularly if you're new, that we expect you to kind of go through with your first couple of years. Additional practicum placements. We continue to reach out to all of our post-secondaries in terms of those. Supporting mentorship programs for teachers. Brenda Barlow does a phenomenal job, but it certainly could use some support. And we'd like to expand that to make sure that's for all staff in terms of those mentorship possibilities going forward. And wellness and attendance initiatives. So actions, enhance employee development programs, developing hiring process practices which are aligned with district goals, improving onboarding and offboarding processes, so ease of which people can ladder into a position, but also as they exit in terms of the processes around that too, to make sure that that is efficient. Improving coaching and feedback process, developing more APL sessions for our admin, and enhanced mentorship programs for all staff. Not just teachers. In terms of that came on out, we need to do that for everybody. Developing strategies to address violence in the workplace, certainly concerns there with their staff, that what can we do to make sure that one, staff have the appropriate training, and also that there's appropriate staffing in terms of meeting the needs of our kids, and so that our staff are not at risk. Promoting and supporting wellness and attendance initiatives, ensuring the district remains proactive and competitive in attracting and retaining staff. And again, a whole list of different things there in terms of working with our universities, and again also exploring other platforms that people may access in terms of researching whether they want to be part of a district, and establishing a stronger media presence as part of the district communications plan. I think we have control over what that narrative is going to be through social media, and we can do a lot more going forward in terms of getting out those incredible stories. When you see this document, all the work that's happening, how can we continue to get that out there so people go, hey, I want to be part of that, and our parents get to see how fortunate they are to be part of such a great district. So on that note, I will leave it open to questions.
Okay, thank you. So I have our Vice Chair Coburn, and then let me know if you want to be added.
So just two questions. Develop strategies to address violence in the workplace and ensure safe working conditions for staff. I just think for the benefit of the public, we might want to break that down a little about what kind of violence that might be and how we can ensure safe working conditions. And then the second one, ensure the district remains proactive and competitive and attractive in retaining staff. And I just am curious what you think. It's hard for us to retain people for a pay inequity in some of our positions, given that we're located next to Surrey, or Texas as I call it. What can this board do to help you and support you so that we can get what we need as a district to pay our people what they deserve and then retain them and make them feel like they're valued?
A couple of questions. Well, around the violence in the workplace, that is what you're commenting on, is how we operationalize that is going to be very complex, and there will be a whole array of strategies we bring here. So that'll be one that you'll see certainly fleshed out incredibly over the next little bit.
What does violence in the workplace?
In terms of towards our staff, there could be anything from a verbal abuse, there can be a physical biting, it could be someone's kicked, a whole range of different things that could take place. I'm not sure how descriptive I'd want to be in a strategic plan on it, but in terms of we have employees that face a whole array of different things on a day-to-day basis, and so I know that certainly our director in terms of learning support services, Mike Mourning, is aware of it. He's working with his staff and with teachers and SCAs and others to kind of say, what can we do going forward there? But it's a biggie, no question. In terms of, so it doesn't, there's no difference in pay for teachers versus versus Surrey versus here. So on that side of things, in terms of what you would really be looking for, so we talked about the conversation of Metro, that's something that would really apply more to administrators and excluded staff than it would, and so there is certainly a difference in pay there. There's a difference in pay for SCAs too. Metro doesn't necessarily mean that'll change. It puts us in an argument in terms of trying to encourage the ministry to recognize that in terms of funding, but it doesn't necessarily automatically lead to anything. But I think it is a recognition that if you work in Langley, that the cost of living here, and in fact you have competition in the metro area and it's not that far away, what things can we do if we can't get pay? To your point, what are some other things you can do? Making sure people have solid, I think our professional development within this district is something that attracts people to say, well, you offer some things here that I can't get anywhere else. Resources, we've done a lot in terms of not only furniture, but also in terms of what you can use as a teacher in terms of with your kids to be able to provide those things. And you can say, hey, when I come here, if I can get that. Technology, even though I know there will always be questions about saying, okay, why this device versus that? Most districts say, good luck on you. We at least provide it. So, I mean, they're examples. So they're all little things kind of, and I think you got to take the time as a staff, me included, to make sure you acknowledge, whether it's through social media or other places, to say, we're doing great work. Don't hesitate to say it, because I think people, no one's signed on to hear it every day, but it's sure nice once in a while that people say, hey, you know what, I appreciate the great stuff you're doing. And those, I think, are the things that when I talk to the BC Principals Vice Principals Association, and when I talk to the BC Superintendents Association, both of them say Langley's a place people want to be. And I think it's because of all those other things. And it's also very collegial. And we do a lot in terms of trying to encourage collaboration with people too. I think those are things people feed off.
I think it's because you have a great board. But
Why not? Let's throw that in too.
Okay, Trustee Proud.
Awesome, thank you so kindly. I have a few thoughts. Is that okay? You can cut me off if you need to. Firstly, recruitment. I love the concept of recruitment, but I do want I would like to encourage us to be thinking about how we attract families into Langley. I ended up in Langley because I researched educational opportunities in the lower mainland and moved to Langley specifically for SD 35 and what the district was offering from Manitoba. And that required me to do work, and we had a few key educators that were working at UConnect and Langley Fine Arts, and that was a really big piece for us to relocate here. We had many options, and we came here because of that. And I think we need to be thinking about that when we're looking at how we market our district. That was just a side thought that picked up there, so thank you for that. Just tagging on to the question Trustee Colburn presented, and when we're looking at addressing violence in the workplace, we have this violence incident report we call the VIR. I would be really interested in understanding the data behind it. So for example, if we're seeing grade 5, 6 situations occurring repetitively, are we gathering the data? Are we gathering the data as a grade 5, 6 violent incident reports being submitted at a high ratio? Is it directly looking at a predominant ratio of a certain diagnosis, maybe lack of support in a certain area, lack of EAs? I think in order for us to be, where I'm going is to be addressing these and creating strategies, we need the data behind it. And I think that becomes a very important component of what we're doing. And I'm not sure or clear if we're actually gathering that data on that kind of conversation. I think it's important. So that was another thought. And then I'm interested in knowing regarding the initiatives that we have available for wellness and attendance. Is that open for both teachers and educational assistants?
Cases, different things are done with different staff, but it's not intended to be one targeted to one employee group. It's intended to benefit everybody in the district.
Thank you. So I have two quick questions. So we've received over the years updates on our fantastic mentorship program that we have within our district, and I know at the last one with the number of staff that we had to hire and the turnover and so on, there was indication that there might be pressure on spaces and opportunities to take on more people into the mentorship program. So my first question is, how is that going, and is there anything the board can do to support mentorship program growth if there is a capacity issue?
A good question. So I'm going to do two things. One, to Trustee Pro. So Mike does use that information, Mike Morgan, in terms of the VIRs that the department does. And what I can make sure is at a future meeting he'll come and present in terms of that, so you can hear how that works in. So I don't want to miss that question. In terms of yours was the mentorship. Yes, the mentorship in terms of we don't have enough staffing. It'll come up in terms of a budget item. Again, I've said that Brenda does an incredible job, and I know that certainly LTA's offered some suggestions there also. So you will see that come forward. I think the other thing too is we need people to see that mentorship it's not a crutch, it's not a bad thing, and I think we'd like to actually see. Well, we need additional staffing. I do think there's some that think, well, maybe I won't sign up for that thing. I don't want to look like I can't do the job, and that's not what it's about. It's about being with colleagues that are starting out together with some to share those stories and to be able to make sure that they have the support so they can be successful. So there's probably a little bit of shift in mindset, but the scary part will be if they all ran to it. Yeah. I need some more bodies too. So it's going to come up in all likelihood.
Okay. And then my second question is sort of related to, the Langley School District, we're the largest employer in Langley. And, we're a large organization with many different levels of people that work in the building. They don't work in the building. They have different roles to play in a system that's so vital, that serves our future. And I'm wondering, as a district and as a board, one of the conversations that we've had that have come up a few times, and I'd like to see going through in some of our actions and our human resources, is a strategy for understanding where morale is in the district. So going forward, I would like to, I know that we received a grant, and that grant was sort of looking kind of at an initial project. And I'm talking about the whole district. I'm talking about everybody. We as a board have a unique situation with you. We get to hear in your growth plan how you're feeling in there, and we get to check in. And I know you work very hard to keep connections with everybody in the district, but for us as a board, it also gives us valuable feedback in how we're doing as a board. Are we supporting you to support the people in our district? So with the amount of pressures that are being downloaded day by day by the ministry, the amount of constant change. I mean, I don't think that in the 8 years that I've been on the board, I have ever experienced as much and as rapid change as we have in the last 24 months. It just feels like a sprint that is also a marathon that just won't end. It's just change and change. And that has to be just exhausting for everybody in this building and in the schools. And so I really personally, as a trustee, and I'm sure, as a board, we've talked about this, is important for us to hear how it's going. So I don't want to put you on the spot now. I know that we have that exciting grant that will help us maybe sort of look at ways to do that, but I think I'd like to hear how we can hear feedback on how we're doing as a district, as a board, and what we can do better to support everybody from every level in this district if possible.
So just as a follow-up to that, is I'd hope to have the findings from that report from Rangi. She was hoping to bring it to the May meeting. We don't control, it's being written externally because we tried to kind of have an arm's length in terms of how this kind of came out. It will be ready for June, is my understanding. We'll get there. I think it'll be a good starting place because all the partner groups were involved. But I think it'll just be a starting place in terms of what is a recognition of where things are at currently and what are some ideas about what we can do going forward. And I hopefully haven't exhausted people anymore by the length of tonight's report. But at the same time, I think you're right. I think it's tough. You look around people in this room. I mean, the amount of work and pressure that people are under on a day-to-day basis, it takes a toll. And I do think we have to do everything we can to be mindful of that. So I appreciate your question.
And thank you for raising that. And I'm going to go to the next two speakers we have. It's just, every day people in this district in every position do more with less. We're lucky. We're lucky to have the people that work here every day and our partners who, after a long day of work, come and sit here. And so I'd like to know how's it going and what can we do better. So, Trustee Todd, and then we're going to go back to Trustee Perot, who has a second question.
So, a nice segue from employees and morale and that. So it just came to me when we were talking about the mentorship, and so our action is to enhance mentorship programs for all staff, and you referenced the fact that you've had discussions with the LTA, and I'm just thinking that's something we could just work jointly with the employee groups. Talk to our principal. So how can we build the mentorship program, reach across the table as it is, and say, okay, we want to expand our mentorship program, and how can we do it with your help, your insight, your advice, how to make it better. So and just starting there, and it's a good starting point. I'm curious, you mentioned that you've had discussions already. That's in the works?
Yeah, I mean, those discussions have been ongoing through Brenda's work for years, and she's worked with Wendy Cook in terms of, so there are other programs out that you can access. Wendy's brought those to our attention. Charlotte's brought to our attention that SCAs, we can't leave them out. Certainly John has brought up in terms of, LPVPA, what we need to, I mean, it's staggering in terms of new people and what we're doing there. So it is a work in progress, and I think there will be a budgetary component because it requires bodies. It requires time, it requires resources, but if you don't do that well up front, you tend to lose people in all three of those areas. So we will continue to work there. I know Barry and Michelle certainly involved there. I know Woody and Mel. I think there's a number of us that are engaged in that, and certainly over the next year, next 4 years, we've got quite a bit of work to do in that area.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Perot, and then I believe that's the end of questions.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Firstly, I meant to say when I opened up my last question, Gord, I wanted to thank you for speaking to and clarifying the Metro and Pay conversation. That's very important that we have a very clear understanding of what that conversation's about and that we remain clear on that. So I thank you for that. My other question was regarding the Master Teacher Program. Are we creating a CENTIV program to recruit more Master Teachers for that mentorship? I know we got a program going. I was here last month and I saw them doing their thing here. So I'm just interested in what are we doing to draw more Master Teachers forward?
Yeah, good question, and I don't know whether Woody or Mel wanted to dive into the mentorship piece at all. Also, I think certainly again, you got to build that capacity in all the schools too, and have people willing to take that on, because no matter how many Brendas you have, nothing beats being in the building and having a veteran, whether it's Wendy or anyone else in the building, to say, hey, can I come to you and ask the questions, so I don't need to go to admin, because you don't want to go to admin on everything. And also in terms of just being able to help them navigate just even the nuances in terms of how to run things day to day when you're starting out. So I think it's going to be a bit of a blend. If you're going to do that and call on people to do that in each of the different sites, can you find some things to do to, give them some release time or some other ways to say, hey, we acknowledge that it's taking your time to do it. And you can't always, and it's often after school because everyone's running around in classes during, but you feel free, Woody, if you want to jump in on it, or Mel, because I know they do a ton of work there.
Yeah, just following Superintendent Stewart's thoughts around the mentorship piece inside of a school. Our instructional services team provides that on a daily basis across the district. So we have Dawn's team that goes into buildings and works alongside teachers to support them in areas that they're interested in and passionate about, and also areas where they want to grow in as learners. And then we also have our instructional coaches that work alongside in some of our buildings to make sure that teachers are feeling supported in the work that they're doing in their classrooms. And again, if they have questions that they're wondering about or things that they want to try with their students, they have that co-teaching model to be able to implement that work and be successful in it. And then we work with our principals and vice principals about how do we support the learning inside of a building so that teachers have opportunities to either work alongside a principal or vice principal in the classroom, or be released to go into other classrooms and observe other teachers teaching. So that can be a multiple of different ways that the administrative team can provide that. Could be TTOCs, could be them, a number of them will go into the classroom, release a teacher. So the opportunity to work within the school day for them to have those experiences provides rich, quality learning for them, and allows them to develop the skills they're wanting to develop. And it's funny, I had a conversation with a teacher today in a building about what are the things that she is noticing, a brand new teacher, that are helping her in terms of her growth. And she said that the support of the administrator, the awareness of the administrator, the readiness of the administrator to jump in and to provide that support, and also the colleagues that she works alongside, being able to share with them the stories that are going on in the classroom, what she can do to better herself in terms of her experiences with those kids inside the classroom. So the culture within the building it's really, really important. And Brenda does an amazing job at the district level of building that capacity and providing those outlets, but also just in the school, the work of our principals and vice principals and our teachers and our support staff to work collaboratively together to build that culture so that people feel the openness to go into classrooms to learn alongside each other about the work they're doing to support students.
That's really fantastic. I'm just wondering, is in that explanation, I'm not hearing where the incentive is to draw the master teachers in. So that's really what I'm after. How are we pulling new seasoned teachers in to be trained as masters?
And it's funny, I asked that question today because one of the things that I'm curious about is that in some of our more complex schools, how do we draw people into those environments that are maybe more complex than some of our other areas in the district? And I asked a brand new teacher that question today. What's the incentive for you to stay here? And she said it's not about any financial incentive. It was about the culture that's been created in the building and the collaborative working conditions that are in that building. So I guess to answer that, you have to experience it, and you have to be involved in that, and you have to see just what the moral imperative is in that moment to be in that building, working alongside that staff to have that experience. And I think Superintendent Stewart said it earlier, it's about celebrating those successes and showcasing the work that we're doing and the great work we're doing. And we do a lot of work, but just taking that pause and reflecting and making sure all of our schools are celebrating those successes, and collectively, as a unified approach to the district, we highlight those and continually think about the great work that all our staff are doing to support our students.
Okay, thank you. So the superintendent does have some closing comments before we move on to the motion. So, superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Dykeman. Just as a wrap up, so it was a lengthy presentation, but it is the next 4 years. And you can see that there's an incredible amount of work there. We can always get better. But I don't ever lose sight of the fact that how fortunate I am to be in this district, and we have incredible people that do great work every day, and I guess I want to make sure that people know putting this together was a collective effort, and it was an incredible amount of work to put it there. But I think it's got us well positioned to move forward and provide the best possible learning experience for our kids. So I want to make sure that I thank everybody for the role they played in this, and I really look forward to seeing this work unfold, because this is what we signed on for. So I just want to make sure I made that clear.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you for that report. As you mentioned, it is the next 4 years, and it's sort of something that, as a board, when you have a newly elected board and you start this cycle, it's really, that's that day that you've got that strategic plan coming to the board is a day that, as a board, we sort of have our direction, our vision, our plan to move forward to. So I'm so excited that we got there, and appreciate all of the 26 meetings and the feedback and the layout and the last hour and a little while little bit, an hour and 15 minutes we spent, and every single one of it was well spent. So thank you for that. So we do now need a mover that the Board of Education approves the strategic plan for 2019 to 2022 as presented, moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Perot. You weren't quite fast enough, Trustee Ward. Not quite. I was looking. So before we call a question on that, any final comments or thoughts that you'd like to share? Trustee Todd.
Just thank you.
Okay, there he goes. We have a mover, we have a seconder. So the motion on the floor is that the Board of Education approves the strategic plan 2019 to 2022 as presented. Seeing no further speakers, all those in favor? Motion is adopted unanimously. Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, so we are now on to school calendars 2019-2020 with item 8.12. Back to you, Superintendent. You're not quite done yet.
On this one, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Assistant Superintendent Barry Bunyan, to share the school calendar, a little bit on the process and where we've landed going forward.
Thank you, Superintendent Stewart. I stand before you again, as I did a month ago, to talk about school calendars. Just a reminder that the process that I'll describe tonight and what's in front of the board for its consideration tonight is what we always bring forward in April. These calendars that are in your package that I'll walk through are the detailed school calendars that will apply for the next school year. They're the ones that have all of the dates that drive all of the different days that we have, where the Pro-D days are exactly, how they affect each school, things like parent-teacher conferences, days where we have report card prep time, design and assessment, et cetera, et cetera. That was none of those details were in the last process we did a month ago, because that process was simply about number of instructional days and number of non-instructional days and where the winter and spring break and the stat holidays all fell. So what's coming before you tonight are the detailed ones. They do come forward in April every year because there is a requirement to get them out to the community at a certain amount of time before the school year is over, so that parents and staff and everybody has full knowledge of the impact that it'll have next year when it comes to days when students are in school, not in school, staff are working, not working, that kind of thing. So that's what's before you today. So just a little bit of background. We have worked really hard. When I first started looking at calendars for the district and the board office about 10 years ago, we had 43 schools in the district and it felt like we had 43 calendars. And I think actually we did. There were some days in common, but most days were different. That was challenging for our community, challenging for different activities and processes and things we wanted to do in the district with our staff. So we've worked really hard in the last few years to increase the alignment, to bring things together. So even though you will have, I think it's 8 calendars in front of you, they are actually brought together in a cohesive way. There's one for linear schools, one for semestered schools, there's one for elementary schools. And then on top of that, we do have unique programs in our district that run unique calendars, like the Fine Arts School, the Fundamental Middle Secondary School, Simon's U Connect. And so they will all have different variations as well. But hopefully, for those of you who can think back long enough, you can see that the calendars you have before you today are a lot more simplified than they have been before. Our district has integrated for many years a 2-week spring break by adding additional 5 days of classes not in session. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, how that's done. In some circumstances, a year will have a calendar variation day. That has happened this year and last and will happen again next year. Trustees are well aware of that because we've talked about that in the last process. We do have a joint HR-LTA calendar committee that meets yearly to review all the proposed calendars and bell schedules prior to presentation. We receive feedback from the LTA on some things that they see as important for us to look into. Sometimes mistakes are picked up, different things happen. We also have, over the last 2 months, had conversations with all our employee groups on the calendar. And I think as trustees are aware, we had a very extensive parent feedback process this year, which gathered quite a bit more information than we actually have in the past. There seemed to be a much greater interest. So we have had some pretty good parent feedback as well that we drew upon to make decisions again this year. Based on that, on what parents were telling us, based on what we were hearing from schools, based also on a collaboration survey that we did with all teachers in the district, which got a number of hundred of responses. We've taken all that information, and one of the big changes that you'll see in the calendar this year over the last few is that we have now removed collaboration days and half days from the school calendar. For those trustees who maybe aren't aware, that time was just redistributed time that was taken from school improvement day time and design and assessment time, and distributed in 6 75-minute chunks throughout, I think it's 6, anyways, 75-minute chunks throughout the year. The feedback we were getting is that although everybody really values collaboration, there was nothing that said people thought collaboration was a bad idea. The research tells us it's good. Parents even said they understood that really good things are happening. There was a significant impact. That's 6 days where schools are going to end early. That's difficult for families to make arrangements. Some of the feedback, quite a bit of feedback we got from the teacher survey was they felt that collaboration would be more effective if it was in longer chunks of time. That 75 minutes, when you get there and you get set up and you start going, you're really looking at 60 minutes or less. They felt that more time dedicated to collaboration. But our hands are tied. We can't simply create a whole bunch of collaboration time within the schedule. We have to meet ministry requirements for hours of instruction. We only have so much time between the start and the end of the school year. We have contractual obligations in the LTA collective agreement with the board that talks about parent-teacher conference structures and report card prep time and things like that. So there's a lot of different variables to balance in order to make it work. So what you'll see, and I'll show an example in a few slides, is a calendar that looks more like a calendar that we had before collaboration started, which was 3 or 4 years ago, where instead of taking design and assessment and time and school improvement time and distributing it over 6 days of collaboration, it's still now contained within single days, which is a time that we used to have for many, many years. And I'll walk you through all of that. Aside from those changes, you probably will not notice a lot of differences in the sense that there are parent-teacher interview dates and there are other things that you're used to seeing. In many cases, our calendars will roll over those dates from the year before with very little change. Every year, though, there is some change. Schools give us feedback on the kinds of dates that they would work well for them and their community. Conversations happen at the school level with staff. Conversations happen often with the PAC, especially the PAC chairperson or the president. So we gather all that feedback and we put it together. And I could tell you that as many people, as many schools and as many staff and as many parents that we have in this district, that's how many opinions we have as to where things should land. So it is a bit of a challenge to find something that meets everyone's needs. But this district's very good at gathering this information and coming up with something that works really well. Superintendent Stewart, did you want to add anything to that?
Just on the collaboration time, that is something that secondary has probably seen for the better part of 10 years or more. I know I had it when I was out at Allegro Secondary. And it was really in the last 6 that I think we tried to do something systemic. The research is clear. It's overwhelming. Collaboration time is the greatest way to make a difference in terms of teacher practice. You're hearing from peers, can't beat it. The difficulty is it's also, to be most effective, it's ongoing. It's not an event. It doesn't happen once or twice a year. It doesn't happen 6 times a year. It's really something that you'd love to see on at least a weekly basis. And our model never did that, and it was never going to be able to. We just have too many constraints to enable it. But I think what it's done, if anything, I totally understand. I'm a parent of 3 kids, and hey, 3 half days, 6 early dismissals, 9 different times, I got to balance the native kids. I understand. I totally get that. But what I hope we will have accomplished within this district is a realization of the benefits of collaborating with your colleagues. And I believe that has happened. And I do believe that people are taking many more opportunities in terms of beyond what those 6 times were to do that. I appreciate the efforts of staff to use staff meetings to say, hey, can we use some of this time to collaborate? I appreciate the work of our administrators to try to free up colleagues. I appreciate the efforts to try to find common prep time for people to make that happen. So there are a myriad of different ways to do it. So while I'm saddened certainly in some ways, to say that we've had to shift the model. I do understand from a parent perspective why, and I do believe that we have a number of other things that can continue to create, maintain a collaborative culture going forward. And I did need to speak to that as we went to this through this process. So thank you.
Okay, so just as a reminder, this is an example of the calendars that trustees voted on and passed at the last meeting. This is the one for next year. This one simply shows the instructional days, which are blue, the vacation and days when everybody's away, which is the yellow. Red is the non-instructional time when students aren't here but staff are, etc. So this should be familiar. A few things again to remind people that incorporate that we do as a local decision, although lots of other districts do this as well, is we do have a 2-week spring break. In order to do that, we have to make up the 5 days worth of instructional time in a different way. And that is done by adding 9 minutes per day, which over the course of the entire year adds up to 5 days of instructional time. So we do meet the ministry requirement for hours of instruction in this way and allow a 2-week spring break, which is something that I think it's safe to say most of the people in the district expect at this point. And then with this unusual day that sometimes seems to show up, that causes us quite a bit of concern. In some days, the number of days required by the calendar regulation, there's actually more days than days you need. So there is a day that is sort of an extra day off, I suppose, or extra day that there is no instruction. That happens in schools, days when schools are closed. And that's a calendar variation day when classes are not in session. And for this year coming up, that day will be on Friday, November 8th, which has been discussed previously and will appear on all of the calendars. So just a reminder quickly, the number of days in the school year. The school calendar regulation, which is part of the School Act, specifies yearly hours of instruction for students from kindergarten to grade 12. There are typically 187 days over the school year. And again, how we determine the number of days has a lot to do with our contractual obligations around when the first day of school can be, when the last day of school has to be, and different stat holidays and winter breaks and spring breaks and those kinds of things. And because the first day of school and the last day in September and the last day of school in June can vary forward or backward, we get this interesting phenomenon where the school year could have as little as 78 days in it, or as many as 182 or 183, just depending on when all these days fall in. Of those days, 180 are instructional. Those are days that students come to school. 7 are non-instructional, which simply means that schools are open, but students aren't there. 3 are professional days, and they're accounted for in all the calendars. There's one in October, the provincial day, one in February, and one in May. There's administrative day, which is the very last day in June, where our staff come to work, but students do not. There are 2 report card prep, design and assessment days. So this will be something that'll look a little different than what you've seen before, because instead of taking design and assessment time and distributing it for collaboration, it's actually what it's traditionally been in the past, which is 2 full days in the year, where half the days for design and assessment and half the days for report card preparation. And then there's 1 school improvement day, which is September 20th. So you'll see these 7 days in all calendars. The Pro-D days are the same in everyone's calendar with 1 exception. The administration day is the same in all calendars. The report card prep design and assessment days can vary a little bit because it depends on whether you're running a semestered system, a linear system, an elementary school, or one of our schools, especially schools like the Fine Arts. But the school improvement day is the same for everybody. Okay, so the one school that has a different professional day than everybody else is R.C. Garnet. R.C. Garnet's our demonstration school, and part of their mandate and what they provide to support education in the district is their teachers actually provide instructional learning to other teachers in the district. And if everybody took the same Pro-D day off, they wouldn't be able to do that. So for a number of years, what happens is R.C. Garnet staff work on the May Pro-D day in order to provide Pro-D for other teachers in our district. And there's a long tradition of that. It's been very positively received, and teachers really appreciate the fact that they can actually watch other teachers in the classroom deliver different instructional strategies. But we compensate the R.C. Garnet staff by giving them a different Pro-D day. So the district Pro D Day for May is on the 15th. You'll see that in all the calendars, except for RC Garnet, which they'll have their day on the 8th. And typically it's always a week before. That's the normal way we do it. We do note that Langley Education Center, there's no significant changes to the LEC calendar for trustees who have been on the board for a while. This is a calendar that always seems to change every year, so we just thought we'd point out this year that there isn't any. So, calendars to be reviewed. I'm not putting them all up on the screen. Trustees have them in your package to see. Aldergrove does a regional calendar, so the high school, the middle school, and the 2 elementary schools all have a regional calendar that fits the needs of that community really well. It does provide some challenges because some of the days you pick for some of the things that happen, work really well in some areas, not so much. So there is some give and take to put this together, but it is a calendar that has existed in that district for many, many years, and the community really appreciates. Then we have an elementary middle calendar, which is common for the other elementaries and middle schools in the district. We have a secondary calendar for our linear schools, one for our semester schools, and as I mentioned before, some of our more specialty schools will have their own unique calendar because the programs they run are so unique. And that's the 8 calendars that you have in your package. So I know you're not going to be able to read this. This is just one of the calendars, the secondary linear one put up, just to give people in the public and everyone an idea of what these calendars look like. They're not the blue and yellow and red that you see of the district calendar. It actually spells out each of the days and each of the months, so you can see what days schools are open, what days schools are closed, where design and assessment report card prep days fall, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also see on there well, you could if you could read it, but anyways, the early dismissal for parent-teacher interviews, which are done in 2 places, typically, not exclusively, but typically in October and March, but they can vary a little bit as well, depending on the school and the program. Okay, so the schools, we are required by the School Act to be in compliance with the with the calendar regulation. So all of them have been checked to make sure they comply with everything, and all calendars meet the minimum hours of instruction for next year. For kindergarten, that's 848 hours. For grades 1 to 7, it's 873. And for grade 8 to 12, it's 947. Our calendars that you're presented, we didn't write up there, but are also in compliance with all things specified in the collective agreement, which has a big impact on our calendar as well. So I'm happy to entertain any questions, but the board motion that is proposed for your consideration is that you approve the school calendars for the 2019-20 school year as presented.
Okay, I have a speakers list started, so let's start by getting the motion on the floor. So can I please get the minutes of the board calendars for 2019-20 school year as presented, moved by trustee Kuro, seconded by trustee Todd. I'm going to break convention and go in the order of our speakers list, and we'll go to Vice Chair Colbert first, then trustee Kuro.
I don't think you can answer my question.
Oh, okay.
So somebody else is going to have to step in.
Okay.
So
I just, yeah, okay, there we go.
So I'm struggling conceptually, and I've had this question for a long time, ever since I've become a mom. I struggle conceptually with how 9 minutes tacked on to the beginning or end of the day translates to the same as 5 days. It's kind of like the last 10 minutes of the school day is the equivalent to the last day before Christmas, but it happens every day for 10 minutes. So from an educational perspective, I really struggle, and I'm wondering if you would say 9 minutes a day translates to or is equal to the same as 5 whole days in terms of educational value. Any takers?
All I can say is the 9 minutes translates mathematically to 5 days. I understand yours is a very different question.
So as a trustee,
Yes.
I'm concerned with how things are good for children and families from an educational perspective. So mathematically, I've crunched the numbers, but from an educational standpoint, an educational value in terms of what's best for the children and the parents in this district, does 9 days tacked on to the beginning or end of the day, in anybody's opinion, translate to the same as 5 whole days consecutively? I'm really just floating it out there for curiosity.
So I think that that would be most appropriately answered by our superintendent. So
no study on it. I can tell you in terms of, it's always, you're looking at teachers and every minute counts. And so you know what, you're going to go classroom to classroom. So I don't think there's ever been anything that says, hey, this is 5 days and we're affecting these 9 minutes added. I hope, of course, the school day is always used well. I'll tell you what, one of our districts just next to us, Abbotsford, they explored the idea of saying, hey, parents, why don't we get rid of this? The superintendent almost said to move out of the community. The reality is many parents welcome this for their own mental well-being, though I know that there could be stresses in terms of challenging demographics. We as a district have tried to provide some opportunities during that time to meet that. And I think in terms of, so for families, for staff, people find that, it's a welcome break. It's something that people have become used to. And quite frankly, it wasn't even, when they put that out for a vote, it wasn't even close. So I guess if it's, I'd have to see if there's any study around the minutes. I hope every day and every minute is used well. I think in terms of what this has done from, we talk about wellness, and we talk about our families being able to access some other opportunities. It sounds like those benefits have really become intrinsic to this conversation. Others are welcome to weigh in. That would be my.
I remember when we as a district switched to the 2-week spring break. Of course, at that time it was financially spearheaded because of the deficit. Our superintendent at the time spent a great deal of time pointing out with the days in session how we still are within those days in session, and if we added the 5 days back, then we'd be going to 185 days in session. Of course the ministry requires a certain number of minutes. They don't measure it in days, which is why the 9 minutes is used as a benchmark, and those 9 minutes wouldn't add anything to that. But when you take the 180 days in session, then you add that 2-week spring break, you're now up to 185. And would you break it up, as the example she gave, would you then just add other days, right, somewhere else? We, during the balanced calendar conversation, talked about, removing that idea of a 2-week spring break and how things would be broken up. And towards the end of that consultation, there was a conversation about the 2-week spring break, and the initial feedback we received from our community was like a resounding no. They didn't want to go back to a 1 week. So that was a conversation at the time with that district. There are individual situations. It was very challenging for some parents with that break, and as the superintendent mentioned, there's other opportunities that try to be offered to minimize those transitions and the impact. And those that work, we've worked hard to work with the township to offer opportunities, and no one solution is going to fit everybody's needs. But what I heard from our community was that they didn't want to go back from a 2-week spring break, and in these situations, you sort of have to look at the collective and what's coming back from the collective. So yeah, when you look at the history of how it started, we started from this deficit position. We implemented this as a cost-saving measure. Going back, though, the significant portion of the community does not want to have that conversation, as I've heard. So.
I was just from an educational perspective, right? Because 9 minutes doesn't seem, all too substantive. But when you said, in terms of our staff and their wellness, and then again, it's with that trickle down. So that really answers my question, is that in terms of how happy our people are is actually an educational benefit. So thank you.
I have Trustee Pro and then Trustee Todd.
Thank you, through the chair, to Mary. I really want to say actually thank you. Thank you for hearing our parents, doing the consultation, and weighing and measuring, especially the sufficient amount of concerns that came forward regarding early dismissals that impact our families, families who work, single parent families, and those of our families, children with needs who get impacted heavily through too many transitions. And as Trustee Dykeman indicated, we can't satisfy all the needs, but that was a big piece. And so I just want to extend on behalf of myself, and I know from families with needs, and then all the other families who spoke out and advocated very thoughtfully on this. Thank you.
I'll respectfully accept that on behalf of the strategic planning team, because as a team, we were the ones who worked through these things with the calendar, but thank you for that.
The last speaker I have on the list at this point is Trustee Todd.
So a calendar, and even the calendar process is somewhat of a imperfect document, and in endeavor and in compromise. And I would like to echo the thoughts around that. I'm glad we did listen to parents. I think probably we had the most robust response that we've had in a while. And that's probably a good thing, because every now and then, we tend to go off in one direction and we go, oh, is anyone following us? And in this situation, I am thinking about education as a whole. I am somewhat concerned that, giving up collaboration at this time, hopefully it's viewed by the profession that we sprinkled minutes throughout the year, and we gave it kind of a start. And I hope that we look at other creative ways that we can continue to build collaboration into the school year, because it's kind of like, that's when you have a truly collaborative staff, and wherever it is, that's when you build great schools. Because and it's not that we're giving up on that. I think that maybe we have to kind of just do, okay, we've tried this, we started down this path. We also listened to the very real economic cost and the hardships that we imposed on parents over the last few years. And we're going back to this, but we hope again for the future that this process has continued on, and again, pass on our heartfelt thanks to the strategic planning group that got together. And I'm always impressed when you come up with 8 different calendars, and I go, well, Aldergrove has its own little region that's working on this. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I do not have any further speakers on this motion. We do have this motion moved, and it is seconded. And as I said, I don't see any further speakers, so we can call debate on it. So all those in favor that the board approves the school district calendars for 2019 to the 2020 school year as presented? Any opposed? The motion is carried. I'd like to ask my fellow trustees, we do have probably another hour left. Would you like a 5-minute recess to, just a second, to or use the facilities? Could I please have a mover that we take a 5-minute recess, moved by Trustee Ward, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. All those in favor of 5-minute recess. We will be back here at whatever time that comes to, sometime around 9:45. Okay, we'll be right back. everybody, if we could start to make our way back to our chairs. Yeah. I know. I know. I felt the same way. Yeah. Yeah, just a touch. All right. Trustee Perot, Coburn, Trustee Todd. Secretary Treasurer. Superintendent. Trustee Perot.
Bronze. Bronze.
All right. So we all have almost everybody back. So we're just going to get started. So we're going to call the meeting back to order at 9:44 p.m. We are now on to the Secretary Treasurer's reports, and we're going under 9.1, which is our action items related to policy. And our first policy is policy number 7300, physical restraint and seclusion. Over to you, Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Policy 7300, physical restraint and seclusion, was presented to the board at the March 12th meeting to be put out for notice of motion. That notice of motion went out, and we had two pieces of feedback that we received for that notice of motion, which has since been forwarded to trustees and the Learning Support Services Department. They have looked at those two pieces of feedback and have made a couple alterations to the policy that are highlighted in your packet. And we have Michael Mourning and Carmen Eberly from Learning Support Services here to be able to help with any questions that the board may have on that policy.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I do have a speaker on that, and it's Trustee Todd.
Yeah, just so we've done this a policy or policy tweaking. Have we sent it out for legal advice?
Okay. Okay. So Secretary Treasurer, through Secretary Treasurer.
Yes, we have.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to get a motion on the floor. I know that Trustee Todd's question was for clarification. So the motion that we have is that the Board of Education adopts policy number 7300, physical restraint and seclusion. Could I please get a mover for that motion? Moved by Trustee Trustee Ward, seconded by Trustee Todd. Are there any questions on this policy? Trustee Pro.
Thank you, Trustee Dyken. I'm interested in understanding and there's still irony in general. If we can have this post an evaluation period, and I'm not sure how to articulate it or what protocol would be, or that we can take that back and look at it again in like 6 to 8 periods or what have you, to go where are we at with it, do we have feedback on it, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Secretary Treasurer, do you have any comments on that?
That's something we can do.
Yeah. We have received, two pieces of feedback, but at any time we have a perfect right to bring a policy back for feedback.
We also are entering into a process starting this spring, but mainly into next fall, where we are looking at all our policies in all our procedures, and having a consultant come in to help us to do that. So that could be done as part of that process as well, because that'll carry into September and October, so we'll have a few months of experience with that policy.
Okay, and I believe that Trustee Pro does have a follow-up, and then we will be going to Vice Chair Coburn, who's on the speaker's list.
Thank you, Trustee Dykeman. So at that time, then we can take an opportunity then to review it. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
At that point in time, we'll be reviewing every policy.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Coburn.
I just would like to point out that we have to have this policy, that this isn't a policy that the Langley Board of Education crafted up. We would like to be able to restrain and seclude our children. So for myself, I struggle with the policy. I struggle with so much of it. We are directed by the province to have this policy in place, and I think that it's just pretty fair that we put that out there. And I understand that it's for the safety of everybody, but it's not just something that we're doing in the Langley School District.
All right. Any other speakers on this policy? Okay. I don't have any other speakers on the speakers list, and we do have a motion that the Langley Board of Education adopts policy number 7300, physical restraint and seclusion. All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. All right. Thank you very much for coming in tonight to be available to answer questions, and thank you for your work on this policy. All right, so we are now on to policy 9.1.2, policy number 1400, trustee indemnity.
So the trustee 1400 trustee indemnity was presented also on the March 12th meeting and sent out for notice of motion. We have not received any feedback on that notice of motion. And the only change is a tax requirement change that we have to make. So it is for your consideration to adopt tonight.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Treasurer. The changes that were made in this policy too were required. They were to align with the taxation requirements with CRA. So they weren't really substantial changes. They were required in order to meet the tax laws. So if I could please get a mover that the Board of Education adopts the revisions to policy 1400, trustee indemnity, moved by Trustee Todd, seconded by Trustee Perot. Are there any comments or questions on this policy? I do not have anyone on my speakers list, so seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. We're now on to policy 1401, trustee expenses, Secretary Treasurer.
So policy 1401, trustee expenses, was presented at the February 26th regular board meeting with request for notice of motion to be served. That notice was served, and we have not received any feedback on that, so it is brought back for your to vote on tonight.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Can I please get a mover that the Board of Education adopts the revisions to policy 1401, trustee expenses, moved by Trustee Perot, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. It's getting late. I'm starting to fall asleep. All right, any other questions or comments on that? Trustee Ward.
Yeah, just my comments here, and I kind of reflected that at the March meeting. My concerns here with some of the new language is it says trustees will request approval of the board chair and vice chair prior to making any expenditure. So a couple different comments. One is about it doesn't matter who's in that position at the time because this will carry forward obviously, but my question is for legacy here as far as gatekeeping. So I'd rather have specifics, and I thought we had asked staff, and I don't recall exactly, but asked staff for some sort of comparison or analysis with other communities and what they're doing or with other school districts. But I don't like the idea, no matter who it is, to kind of have gatekeepers. I'd rather have objective elements so that you reduce the possibility of subjectivity.
Right. So I think, as I recall the conversation at that time, Trustee Warden, thank you for your follow-up on that. So trustees at any time have the absolute right to come to the board at any time with any request. So the chair and vice chair cannot, the opposite isn't disapproval. Like, we can't not approve something. So if you as a trustee, say you came to us and sent an email and said, I would like to attend this, and both the chair and vice chair looked at it, or one of us, and sort of couldn't really easily look at it, like if it wasn't like a very obvious trustee thing, and say to you, like, this is something that aligns with your role as trustee. So let's just for fun pick something out of the air. Say you decided that you wanted to go to a movie, and it was like Bohemian Rhapsody, like at the theaters, and you were going to go to Cineplex, and you wanted to go watch that movie, and we sort of went, well, Trustee Ward, why are you going to see Bohemian Rhapsody at Cineplex, and how does that relate to your trustee work? And you came back and said, well, I like singing. We would then say, well, you're going to have to probably ask the whole board. We are not empowered or able to clearly defend that, because at the end of the day, when those reports come out, as chair, I'm the spokesperson who has to sort of defend the questions that come there. But as a whole board, we all wear the decisions of the board. We have to be accountable to our public. So let's pretend that you didn't want to ever bring your expense to the chair and vice chair first. You could at any time at a meeting like this or another meeting of the board move a motion to ask for the board to consider a request for you to have an expenditure that was outside of our already agreed expenditures, like BCSTA, Trustee Academy, AGM. Those are ones we as a board have all agreed. Yeah. It's the extraordinary expenses that are not ones that we have as a board have either encountered or expect. So this is meant to be I'm planning on using my card to purchase for something. Here is a heads up. Are there any concerns? And then we might say, either the expense is large or the expense is something new. Let's take it back to the whole board to have a decision, because it's the board's budget. Yeah. It's the board's budget. So the opposite of concerns over an expense is not that there is any gatekeeping. There is no gatekeeping, because we're a democratic organization. We're a board. At any time, you can bring any request or any item. You have a full right to bring something up on the agenda, no matter what it is, even if it's not a trustee expense thing. There's no ability for the chair or vice chair to block that right of yours. So although you may be looking at it and sort of saying, okay, well, the opposite of approval would have to be not approving something. That's just not the reality of this situation, because we couldn't not. We don't have any more power than what we have convened as an organization, but we do have the ability to look at something and say, that's something that's been spent before by a trustee. That's not something that needs to come to the board.
Okay, can I follow up on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we can adjust the language to kind of hit that target, and that is, so you mentioned the opposite of requesting approval is maybe to deny. Perhaps it could be will approach or something, words along those lines. What I'm looking for is, like you mentioned before, we wear it as a board, and the chair and the vice chair for sure are going to be the spokespeople. But at the same time, we wear it as individuals when we go to knock on doors, 3.5 years henceforth. So I think I'd rather have, in some respects, either no Pro D or something where there are basic criteria, we've stated them in a matrix or something along those lines, where I can kind of evaluate ahead of time and go, okay, here, and here. Like, I know kind of intuitively, I get it, but at the same time, it's just kind of nice where you go, okay, here's a certain number of criteria. Like if we wanted regional, for example, we don't want trustees to go outside of BC because that's traveling too far, unless it's under these circumstances. Asterisks, here's the circumstances that you might approach. So again, that might sound like I'm looking for too much specificity, but I think it might be worthwhile, especially in full disclosure to the public.
Okay, so Trustee Ward, that just wouldn't be possible, because there's the National School Board conventions. There's other conventions where people have gone where it was okay. So the purpose of the policy is to guide a process of how somebody would go about being able to use their Pro-D fund. It's not about being prescriptive in how they can use it. It's the process of the transparency. So the policy is attempting to speak to accountability and transparency of the process, not about a matrix for approving it. Though your point's well taken, it just wouldn't be impossible, because that could actually prevent somebody from accessing an excellent Pro-D opportunity that we haven't seen. Sort of that in that crystal ball gazing role of policy is not to box in a trustee, because we're a collective. The collective achieves its goals by when a trustee has a concern with it, bringing it to the board as a whole. This is just a mechanism for not having to convene a meeting every time if it's clearly something like, I'd like to attend this educational thing. And then we would just say, okay, well, we can't look at this and see that the board would be comfortable with this. We're going to just have the whole board come back. So this is about having that equal level of autonomy as trustees, but also the ability to have some accountability. Once again, if there were concerns about this policy, say in a couple months when we have our entire policy review, because remember, no matter what, even if it went through the chair and vice chair, every trustee is required to report out on Pro-D that they've accessed at the next meeting. So it's not that you're not going to hear about it. You clearly will hear about it, because it's a requirement of our policy. So if Vice Chair Coburn and I look at an opportunity, somebody's going to say something related to an upcoming entrepreneurship or an upcoming thing on inclusion, and we said, oh yeah, that's clearly something that a trustee can defend or be accountable to the public on. Yeah, that seems fine, and you have enough room in your budget. Most of the time, we're just looking at how close the person is to their budget, not the content. If the person's already clearly over, they would have to bring it back to get an increase in budget if it was the board's will. They are then at the next regular meeting of the board going to have to report out on that opportunity, like last time I reported out on Harrison, right? So you will know about it. It's not about having a cloak. But if it's something that we can't say, well, we could clearly account to the public, then, we're going to have to come to the board and make a collective decision. Now, going forward in a couple months when we have our policy review, and then if there was concerns with the way the wording was going, or you wanted to dig into it more, that would give an opportunity for us to examine it once it's been in place for a few weeks. And you, at any time, if there was a concern, like any other trustee on this board, could clearly ask for this policy to be reviewed. I have Vice Chair Coburn, and then I have Trustee Todd.
Thank you, Chair Dykeman. I'm just hoping you can explain. So when our expense reports go, is it the bulk sum, or is it a breakdown of what we spent that money on? First question. And then to Trustee Ward's point about being accountable and you're knocking on doors, I think that this process that we have in place actually makes you more accountable, because if you want to do something, and if at all we think, this is going to be hard, this is going to be tough to defend, and it comes in front of the whole board, and then the entire board says, yeah, we can support this, then that you're good because the entire board supported it, so you'll have no problem justifying it. And then you won't have to justify what your colleagues, because we wear everything. So some things are just very easy, and we wouldn't want to call a meeting for it, but other things are a little more, what do we think? And those were the things that would come to the entire board, and that's just a second layer. But our expense reports are public. I'm just curious to what extent the breakdown is.
The SOFI report's a bulk report, but I'll let the Secretary Treasurer dig in a bit deeper on that.
The SOFI report states the total expenditures that trustees have made. There's no in-depth detail, but that's the same for any staff member.
Trustee Todd.
So, thank you to the Policy Committee for doing a lot of work in modernizing some of our policies. I like the clarity of much of this. I do find that some of the terms, like we've struck out language that doesn't make sense anymore. But the part where, and again, it's a little bit about language. it sounds a little bit prescriptive. Trustees will request approval of the board chair and vice chair prior to making any expenditure. And I know that it's not just any expenditure, it's any expenditure to do with. So even if we could add any related expenditure, it references what you mentioned up above, but just any expenditure sounds a little bit strong. So I don't know if you would take that as a friendly amendment. Receipts for purchases made on district credit cards submitted monthly. The board chair and vice chair shall review all expenditures made by trustees at agenda setting. So, or trustees should. No, I guess you need will.
Yeah, so thank you for that feedback, Trustee Todd. The problem is that the italicized text is not being read in the context of the first opening sentence. So trustees are encouraged to participate in conferences, conventions, workshops, and seminars relating to leadership, education, or schooling. So that's the subject, right? Which then goes down to the italicized. Then it says, accordingly, trustees attending conferences, conventions, workshops, and seminars shall have all related expenses. So once again, speaking to the italicized text below, paid by the school district consistent with budgeted amounts, required approvals, and the board's policy 2306 travel expenses. So when you finally get to past mileage and sundry legitimate expenses like meals, long distance, telephones, that's the expenditures that they're saying. You may spend your money on whatever you wish, but if you're spending the district's money on the district's purchasing card, then there has to be a mechanism to ensure that those are legitimately being spent. So we talk about risks in audit committee, and we talk about other concerns. This isn't about restricting people. It's about facilitating good stewardship and having collective accountability to the public. This is about being accountable to the people who vote us in, the people who pay taxes. It's not about restricting any one trustee. We swore an oath that we would uphold, all of the parts that go with this office, the trust of the spending of people's taxpayer dollars, how we're going to do this, how we're going to report out. So it's challenging when the italicized text starts with trustees will request, but it's in the context of the 4 paragraphs above that are saying, if you're going to go put it on the district purchasing card, and it's not something that we do on a regular basis, then please just follow what would be if you weren't sitting in this seat and you were sitting out there, what you would demand from us, which is that there'd be some sort of mechanism before people use purchasing cards. It'd be quite interesting to know that most districts don't have purchasing cards. Most don't. You spend your money, you submit a form and get it back. So because we have been entrusted to have this card, then we need to have a mechanism that gives the public good faith that we're following what we need to follow. Trustee Ward.
Thank you for your patience. I agree 100% that we're fully accountable to the public. That totally makes sense. And my point earlier, maybe an extreme point of removing it completely, or something, kind of adds to that kind of point. I do have concern with respect to the language. Trustee Todd mentioned some things. The request approval versus having something like request review of the board chair or something like that, that shows like, hey, the board chair and the vice chair are there to provide guidelines, experience, and that sort of thing. So it doesn't come across as, like I said, I've heard what you've said, and I understand you've contextualized it. However, moving forward with another board down the road, they don't have that context. They're just reading the words, and I don't know if they're going to get the same impression that you delivered here to explain it. I wouldn't. When I see approval 20 years down the road, somebody else sees us, I think they're going to think, oh, those. I use the words gatekeeping. It might be strong language, but it seems to imply that. I'd like to review the language, and even if we can review it later on, I don't think we should, in my view, vote to pass this the way it stands, just so that we can adjust it later. I think we should make it correct and now or later. Anyhow, thank you.
So we will have to vote on it tonight. Went out for notice of motion. It's gone out for notice of motion for 60 days. There was no feedback, and there was no feedback from this board that there was a concern with that like isn't moving a motion to defeat it or something like that. Now, the thing is, without being convened as an official board and being given direction that the board is comfortable with it going through the vice chair, we have no authority to do something without it being a whole board, unless the board's given us that authority. So as it stands right now, you know, this policy that's before you says, okay, chair and vice chair, you can look at certain expenses, and as long as they're reasonable and defensible, then you can just let that trustee know that it's okay to go ahead with that expense. In the absence of some sort of approval from you as a board, we don't have that authority. So that's why that's in there. That's why that has to be in there. Because 2 minutes outside of a meeting with the secretary treasurer, we only have the powers that you have, you know, for lack of a better word, bestowed on any of us. Just like when we strike a committee and we create a task force, we're saying to the trustees that are on that committee, you're able to do the things within these four corners that we've given you in a task force. This policy is the same thing. Right now, in the absence of a policy passed tonight in whatever form, the policy stands without the changes to address the fact that we now have purchasing cards, and we've now given the opportunity for, or an expected opportunity for a chair and vice chair to look at smaller items and say that they're okay to go ahead, and larger items have to come back to the board. So that's why that language is in there. We have no independent authority or autonomy without you telling us that's okay. You know, personally, I'm going to vote in favor of this motion tonight because I believe we need to have something on the books. And if there are concerns brought forward by trustees that that system's not working, then we are going to be going ahead in a few weeks with a policy review. But I would prefer not to have us tonight without a policy. And I would prefer to not see that we have to call a meeting each time we have a trustee that wants to go to something like high ground or another thing, because we don't have any authority to do so without some sort of mechanism we've all agreed works for us as a board. Are there any other speakers to this motion? Trustee Todd.
So yeah, given the explanation, I will be voting in favor of this policy update. I think there are some concerns with some of the language, but I think this is a big improvement over what we have right now. So we do need some kind of guidelines, and I believe it is a better place. I still think that it may come through with when we do a policy review. So it's not perfect, but it's definitely an improvement on what we have right now, which is a little bit haphazard and maybe ambiguous, and ultimately we have to be accountable to the public.
Okay, any other speakers? Okay, seeing no further speakers, we moved a motion, I believe it's on the floor, that the Board of Education adopts revisions to policy 1401, trustee and expenses. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. All right, so as I mentioned, Trustee Ward, would we go through with the policy review? Feel free, and before that, at any time, to approach if you have concerns with the policy going forward. All right, so we are now on 9.1.4 Annual 5-Year Capital Plan, 2019-2020 bylaw, and it's got a whole bunch of numbers, which I'm not going to read at this time of night. We're just going to let you go for it, Secretary Trump.
Thank you. As part of our annual 5-year capital plan process required from the ministry, districts submit their 5-year capital plan in June of each year, and then the ministry provides a response letter to that as to what projects are being advanced, whether approval levels or being in investigation stages or those sort of things. And also then requires a bylaw from the board for us to be able to access those funds. So we have now received our response letter to the capital plan submission that the board submitted last June. I just wanted to go through that quickly with trustees, and then the bylaw that we require. The first thing is that they have approved a project definition report for Northeast Latimer. It's a site that we bought in the last year. So this would be for the building of a future elementary site. So they've asked us to work on that project definition report for October 31st, 2020. So this is basically the business case for the need and the size and the scope of that project, which would then be further advanced to another stage, taken to Treasury Board for formal approval. So this isn't approval to build, this is approval to be basically the first stage in the approval process for these projects. There's always a two-stage process. The things that the board has received approval to do in this capital plan letter is the next group. So we've been able to do window upgrades. These are both phase 1 for Brookswood Secondary and DW Poppy. These are for windows that need replacing at both those facilities. So this is step 1 or phase 1 for both those schools, and it'll be multi-phase projects that we'll have to put in requests for over the next couple of years. Nickelmeckle and Glenwood received playground grants from the new grant that was implemented last fiscal year for playgrounds for elementary schools. So we will need a bylaw to cover off all those, and that's in your package tonight. There is also, referenced earlier, some seismic studies that we've been asked to do. So we have some seismic project definition reports that we have been working on for a while. One for Vanguard, one for Short Read, and another one for RE Mountain, and you can see the dates that they would like to see those back, and we are in process working with the capital branch on defining what those projects are as well. So that was our approval letter for this year on the capital plan that we submitted. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer that, and if not, the bylaw is in front of you.
Okay, so before we start the bylaw, are there any questions, comments? Oh, Trustee Todd.
So just around seismic, those are our highest needs. Those are our most pressing needs. You know, I know we had before we had charts about which schools needed the work the soonest, and I mean, just what I referenced earlier was collaboration, but this seems to be a slow pace for it. And these are highest needs?
These are the ones that have the highest ranked needs, and as I mentioned, the studies that were done were very high level, and as we're going, we're finding, and I know specifically Mountain has more work to it than what was initially thought, but these are the ones that have the highest ranking for us right now.
Any more? Trustee Pro.
Sorry. Through the chair. Last minute. I'm the last minute girl. Regarding seismic stuff, I'm just interested in understanding going forward, are we going to ensure with all the changes we're doing with our phone systems that we are looking at the needs for budget, for communication, for emergency preparedness in the event of the likelihood of an emergency coming down the road?
Secretary Treasurer, do you have an answer to that?
There is some work being done from some funds out of the AFG for some radio communications for it that is being done as we speak. Oh, that's the annual facility grant. The funding for that should be coming to the next meeting. We haven't officially received our amount and the process that should be coming any day now.
Okay, that answer. Okay, all right. So we have a bylaw. I don't have any further speakers on the list, and I'm not looking up till after we read the bylaw. Okay, so the recommendation is that the school district number 35 Langley capital plan 2019-2020, capital bylaw number 2019-2020 CPSD 35-01 in the amount of $980,000 be given first reading. Moved by Trustee Perot, seconded by Trustee Todd. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. We also have a recommendation that the school district number 35 Langley Capital Plan 2019-2020, Capital Bylaw number 2019-2020, CPSD 35-01, in the amount of $980,000 be given second reading. Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Ward. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. And then we have a motion that the Board of Education of School District number 35 Langley approves having all three readings of the Capital Plan 2019-2020, Capital Bylaw number 2019-2020, CPSD 35-01, in the amount of $980,000 be at tonight's meeting. This has to be unanimous, so moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Perot. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried unanimously. And finally, a recommendation that the school district number 35 Langley Capital Plan 2019-2020, Capital Bylaw number 2019-2020, CPSD 35-01, in the amount of $980,000 be given third reading, passed and adopted on the 30th day of April 2019. Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Todd. All those in favor? Motion is carried. All right, so that is the capital bylaw. Okay?
Yeah, just had a delay.
Before we move on, you can ask later? Okay. We are now on to our final information item of the evening, and that is going to be a financial update of the Secretary Treasurer.
Wanted to provide an update to the public on our operating results to the end of March. We've gone through this with the board at our finance facility meeting a couple weeks ago, so this will be a review for some of you. I just wanted to go through at a high level where we're at, comparing to budget and as well as comparing to last year. So you can see our revenue numbers are right in line with what they were last year. It's 70.4% of the budget versus 70.2% for last year, for a total of $143 million in revenue this year so far. Should point out that for the salaries and benefits, we have a mixture of 10 and 12 month employees. So the various categories, we would expect to see different amounts spent. For the 10-month employees, you would expect to see about 70% of the budgets being spent, and for the 12-month it'd be about 75%. So you can keep that in mind as we go through as to how we're tracking. The benefits one looks a little bit strange, being 66% of the budget. Some of that is driven by the fact that we had vacation premiums that we gave holidays that were shared by the employer and the employee for our teachers and our QP staff for a few months to start the year. So there was a section of the year that we didn't actually have those benefit costs for the district, as well as the healthcare tax only kicked in January. So that is a new tax that we will have showing more and more costs as the rest of the year goes on. Our salary for our education assistants is below budget at 65.1%, which is exactly the same percentage as it was last year. A lot of that difference is due to vacancies, late starts, and those kind of things. Some of those costs you will see offset in the substitutes line farther down. Our principals, our other professionals is right in line at 75.5% compared to 76% last year. Principals and vice principals, 73.8% versus the 74.1%, which is just below what you would expect, but not out of the realm of normal. The substitute line, as you can see, is above budget at 77.9%, and you can see some of the costs offset there that you would have expected to have seen under some of the education assistants, and as well as under the teaching category as well for the vacancies and any empty positions that weren't able to be filled on a daily basis or that were late starts for those types of positions. Support staff is right in line at 69.8, and teachers is a little higher than this year, than the previous year. It's at 69.1% compared to 68.5%. And what we're seeing with the teacher salaries the last few years, we've seen some favorability in our average teacher cost. That trend has started to change as we're hiring more experienced teachers. We've actually seen that our average teacher cost was pretty close to what was budgeted. So most of the savings there, instead of it being the average teacher cost, is mainly due to vacancies. Supplies, 77.7%, which is up from last year at 73.3%. So we're spending more in line. One thing we need to keep in account, last year we were spending about $1 million of that student learning grant, and a lot of that was not spent until May and June. So those does have a fairly large impact on the percentages for last year versus this year. So we've spent just under 1.1 million in capital versus 1.2 million in capital last year. So very comparable. And we are now in a deficit position of 1.2 million versus a deficit of just under $1 million last year. So slightly a little more deficit than we were at this point last year. The school districts are always come from a deficit position and slowly get out of it as the year goes on due to the way we are funded and the way our cost structure works. So it's completely normal. You can see the trend line there. Every year has started with a fairly sizable deficit in September and has slowly worked its way to a surplus, or the last year where we ended in a slight deficit. And we're following a similar trajectory this year as we were the last couple of years. We do have some items that we've planned to purchase that will be coming in May and June. So there'll be once again some items later in the year that'll be arriving that'll impact these numbers. We will most likely finish far better than the $3.2 million deficit, but we do think we will still end in a deficit position for this fiscal year. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Do you have Trustee Todd?
This came up, somebody asked this at a different venue, but when we start the year in a deficit, assuming there's some carrying costs for actually being in a deficit, is that built into our structural budget another way? Like, because you're in a deficit, you're actually financing that deficit for a little while. Is that correct?
Not really. And the fact that the way that we are funded, we have a surplus money, we have liabilities that we're funded for that we don't actually have to pay out those obligations until future years. It's one of the arguments that Treasury Board is that districts are flush in cash because we have future liabilities. So we don't actually need to fund those because they've been funded by our liabilities that we haven't actually outlaid the cash. School districts are cash rich in that aspect. What Treasury Board seems to forget is that there are future liabilities that need to go with that. So if they took that cash, we would have no way to pay those future liabilities. It's just more in the timing of and how the school districts are funded.
I don't have any other speakers, but I just, going forward, I certainly hope that, when we talk about our operating budget with the ministry as they're looking at the funding formula, that our board's voice and concerns about that with risk are heard. So it's a comment more than anything, but I am concerned that the changes in how we receive our budget and that the memorandum of understanding signed with our association and the requirement to consult with boards is taken into account, or I fear that our risks related to surplus and deficit are going to become greater. Yeah, Secretary Treasurer.
To that point, Madam Chair, the ministry has already, and I will be bringing more slides and details on this when we do the budget conversation, they have changed the way they have done some of the funding this year, which does make it look like there is new funding for things like special ed and Aboriginal and ELL and those types of categories, but they've shuffled the funds between what was needed for districts to fund the collective agreements and put them into different categories other than the per pupil amount, which is what they usually have done in the past, which has left specifically the metro districts and the Fraser Valley districts short to cover off the cost of those collective agreements, because they've shifted the pots, and some of the pots we're not even eligible for as a district. So that is going to be a cost pressure for us, and I think it relates to your statement about the funding formula, because it does look like they've done sort of a step one in implementing that document.
And this board spent a significant amount of time. It was completely, there was no stone unturned. It was an exhaustive exercise and a consultation. And through the entire consultation, this board kept saying, we're concerned that we're going to carry out this consultation, and in the end, it won't matter. And we went every single conversation, every single opportunity to fill in forms and attend events, and myself as chair with the secretary, treasurer, and superintendent. We attended joint meetings meant for staff and chair. We provided feedback. We kept saying, we understand the struggle of rural districts. You need to understand the struggle that exists with rapidly growing districts. It's just as significant, if not more, because, you know, when you're in a smaller district and things are declining, you kind of can follow the trajectory and figure it out. When it's rapidly growing, you have no idea from one minute to the next what your budget's going to look like. And to be told repeatedly that the intent is just to consult and listen, and then we'll move along and let you know what's going on, and to have this memorandum of understanding between the BCSTA and the ministry, and for us to be locally elected officials who are consulting with the ministry to find out, just out of the blue, when you know that funding comes, it's been changed unilaterally with no consultation and no preparation, and that the exact worry we had that the quantum wasn't going to be the conversation, that they wanted us, you have a pie, there's only so much room, we're going to divvy it up. How much of the pie do you think you need? That wasn't on. We made that very clear. And what did they do? They turned around and said, here's your little piece of the pie we decided for you. I hope you like it. And that's not acceptable. And as a board, I think that we really need to, once we fully understand the budget and that budget presentation, indicate that to the ministry that we're not happy with that. Sorry, what's that, Vice Chair Coburn? Oh. Vice Chair Coburn would like to forward her picture looking upset to the ministry. Okay, any other comments on that rant that I had? No. Trustee Todd's just looking straight ahead. Okay. All right, so that is the end of the financial update. Is that correct, Secretary Treasurer? Okay, so we need to move a motion that the Board of Education receives the Secretary Treasurer's information item reports as presented. Moved by Trustee Todd, seconded by Trustee Pro. Any other comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, the motion is carried. There's no new business. No surprises? Sorry? Going to do that in trustee comments, which is next. Okay, and then trustee comments. I will start down at Trustee Todd.
Thank you. So I'm glad John Pusick's here, because I did want to say I had the pleasure a few weeks ago to attend TEDx again, and it's just a delightful day. I got to experience the Fine Arts School and saw the magnificent display, and talk about honoring. It was just honoring what they've done with members of the Kwantlen Band, and I soaked in it, and then the ideas around TEDx. I really want you to pass on my thanks to the organizing committee. Just that day, and it's a great day to come, reflect, and talk about current trends, but also think about what the future might be like. So very much appreciated, and again, a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Ward.
Forgot to touch that again? Okay.
Don't have a lot to say other than it was great to be at the convention and some good bonding we had there. So it was nice to see that we're getting along well. I just had a good time. That's not a lot to offer.
Trustee Perot. Good. Vice Chair Coburn.
The superintendent was talking about appreciating our staff for what they do. So today, I fell in love with a salmon song at Blacklock Fine Arts, and I had the pleasure of going to see one of their performances. And I've never seen a Blacklock performance, and it's incredible. And I would just love to see the arts expanded into the rest of the city. The research between arts education, socioeconomic, and at-risk youth is huge. But they sang this salmon song, and it was probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. So I would like to invite them, if that's okay. And thanks all for coming.
Thank you. So, as my fellow trustees have mentioned, this weekend we had our BCSTA Academy, and it was our AGM, and so we were all there as a board. And on the AGM day, we had two motions come forward, and one was Trustee Todd's related to moving forward the process of seatbelts and ensuring the board's voices were heard and that it was properly funded, and that passed. And then our second motion was related to a request to move branches from Fraser Valley to Metro. And that was intended to support all of the staff that are affected by the pay grid. Our moving from Metro from Fraser Valley to Metro would not have immediately meant anything, but it would have definitely sent a significant message to the ministry as we're advocating for our staff to be properly compensated, that we view ourselves as a Metro district. I mean, both Langleys that our board covers are within Metro Vancouver Regional District, not Fraser Valley. And it's an odd process to have to go and convince places like Buckley Valley that we should be in Metro. And then one speaker did allude to the fact that his cousin lives in Langley and that he had been here before. I think it was 1950, and that Langley was mostly farms. So we thanked him for his input and asked him to sit down. But unfortunately, that motion was defeated. So as a board, we, all seven of us, because if one of us was going, we were all going, we walked out of the AGM as a sign of support for our staff, and will not be going back until we receive an apology and this matter is rectified. So each one of us took as much as we could to advocate for every one of the staff that we could to have our district moved, and spoke eloquently at the microphone. But unfortunately, the room that day wasn't supportive, and it was mostly due to misinformation. And so we are going to continue to push for these changes and push for the recognition of where our district always should have been, considering where our municipalities are. We will be sending extremely strongly worded letters to our organization. The BCSTA receives a significant amount of money from our district to represent us at the table. And they have a significant amount of power with an MOU with the ministry, and in my opinion, too much power, because we are elected. BCSTA, we pick some people to represent us, like, from all over. We found out this weekend. And not everybody represents Langley. So we were quite distraught over that. And so we will make sure that displeasure is heard loudly. And we just wanted to tell you, though, that the experience this weekend doesn't change our commitment to ensure that Langley is treated in a fair and equitable way. And every single person that works in this district has the support of this board. And there was no hesitation. And I'm so proud to be part of this board. We all walked out because we care about our staff, and we'll continue to advocate as loudly as we can for every person in this district. So thank you to my fellow trustees for a really moving weekend, and it's an honor to work with each one of you. So on that note, good night, everybody. Well, we still have to go through, we still have to let people ask questions. Are there any questions for question period? I do not see anybody who would like to ask any questions at 10:37. But you would be allowed to. We would support that. Okay, so there is no questions in question period. So with that, I need a motion to adjourn at 10:37 p.m. Moved by Trustee Wood, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. All those in favor? Good night, everybody.